My name is Elias Thorne, and for 40 years my son David has obeyed one simple rule: never enter the basement. But when he married Madison, a woman with a beautiful smile and an ugly appetite for money, I knew the rule would be broken. I changed the old lock to a new one with a code, a test I prayed they would fail. Last week I left for a business trip. Last night my phone rang. It was David, his voice shaking. "Dad, she went into the basement. It's not what we thought." I took a slow breath. The trap had been sprung. "Stay right where you are, son," I said. "I'm on my way." Before I tell you what my daughter-in-law found in that basement and the perfect trap my late wife and I designed for a day just like this, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. And please hit that like and subscribe button if you believe that sometimes you have to build a beautiful cage to catch a greedy bird. In my 75 years, I've learned that a house is more than just wood and stone. It's a repository of memories, a fortress of secrets. My house, a sprawling mid-century modern home tucked away in the hills of Los Angeles, is no exception. It's a house I designed and built with my late wife Ruby, a house where every corner holds a story. But for our only son David, one part of this house has always been a closed book, a locked door, a story he was never allowed to read: the basement. The rule was established when he was just a boy of about 10. He was a curious child, as all boys are, and the mystery of the forbidden basement was a siren's call to him. The door was at the end of a long, dimly lit hallway, a simple, heavy oak door with an old, sturdy lock. To him, it was the gateway to another world. I remember the day he tried to pick the lock using a bent paperclip he'd seen in a movie. I wasn't angry. I was a prop master for the biggest studios in Hollywood for 40 years. I appreciated a good attempt at drama. I found him there crouched in the hallway, the paperclip mangled in his small, frustrated hand. I didn't yell. I just stood there until he looked up and saw me, his eyes wide with the fear of being caught. I knelt down beside him, my voice quiet but firm. "David, I said there are only 2 rules in this house you can never ever break. The first is to always respect your mother. The second is that you are never ever to go into the basement. Is that understood?" "But why, Dad?" He'd asked, his voice a small whisper. "What's down there?" I placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's not a punishment, son. It's just my space, my private world. Every man needs one. When you're grown, you'll understand. Can you promise me?" He looked at the door, then back at me, and he nodded. "I promise, Dad." And for 35 years he kept that promise. He grew from a curious boy into a fine, if somewhat gentle man. He became an architect, a builder of houses, but he never again tried to unlock the secrets of his own. The basement became a part of our family's mythology, a quiet, unspoken boundary. It wasn't a place of fear, just a place of accepted mystery. It was simply Dad's basement. After my beautiful Ruby passed away 10 years ago, the rule remained. The house felt emptier, the silence louder, but the basement door stayed locked. David, now a man in his 40s, would visit every Sunday for dinner. He'd help me in the garden, we'd talk about his projects, about his life. But he never asked about the basement. He respected the line. He respected his promise. Then about a year ago, he brought Madison home. And I knew with the cold, hard certainty of a man who has spent a lifetime studying characters that the line was about to be crossed. Madison was beautiful, there was no denying that. She was polished, charming, and intelligent, a successful marketing executive with a dazzling smile and a laugh that could light up a room. But when I looked at her, I didn't see the woman my son was in love with. I saw a character I had helped create a dozen times on a movie set. I saw the femme fatale, the gold digger. I saw it in the way her eyes, while she was complimenting my rose bushes, were actually scanning the architectural details of the house, estimating its value. I saw it in the way she'd gently touch a piece of art on the wall, her fingers lingering a moment too long, her expression not one of admiration, but of appraisal. And I saw it most clearly in the way she looked at the old oak door at the end of the hall. "What's down there?" she'd asked David during her first visit, her voice a light, playful whisper. "Oh, that's just Dad's basement," David had replied a little awkwardly. "It's off limits, off limits." She'd said, her eyes gleaming with a curiosity that felt predatory. How mysterious. "What do you think he's hiding down there? Elias, the family fortune. She'd laughed a beautiful tinkling sound. I had just smiled. Just old movie props and a lifetime of dust, I'm afraid. But I knew in that moment that she would never let it go. To a woman like her, a locked door wasn't a boundary. It was a challenge. It was a promise of a prize to be won. And I knew with a heavy heart that my son, my kind, gentle, and sometimes naive son, would not be strong enough to stop her. So I began to prepare. It was time to dust off an old plan, a final brilliant and heartbreaking plan that my beloved Ruby and I had designed years ago for a day just like this. A day we hoped would never come. The basement wasn't a workshop. It was a stage. And the final act was about to begin. I stood there in the quiet hallway, my hand resting on the cool, smooth wood of the basement door. For 35 years, that simple promise from my son David had been enough. He had kept his word. But I knew with a certainty that was a cold, hard knot in my stomach that the promise of a good man is no match for the ambition of a greedy woman. The story I told him about it being my space was the truth, but it was only a small part of it. It was a simple answer for a complex plan. A plan my brilliant Ruby and I had conceived of long ago. Ruby had a mind that saw the world not just for what it was, but for what it could become, for better or for worse. She had seen friends of ours, good people, torn apart by inheritance battles, their children turning into snarling wolves over a piece of property or a stock portfolio. Character isn't what a person is when things are good, Elias, she used to say, her voice full of a sad, clear wisdom. It's what they are when they think no one is watching, when they're faced with a locked door with a supposed treasure behind it. And so the basement became our test, our diagnostic tool. It wasn't a vault designed to keep people out. It was a theater, a carefully constructed stage designed to see who, if anyone, would try to break in. The rule wasn't just about my privacy. It was a quiet, lifelong examination of my son's character, a test I was proud to say he had passed for 40 years. But when Madison walked into our lives, I felt a tremor in the foundation of our family. I saw in her eyes the same avaricious gleam Ruby had always warned me about. I saw a woman who didn't just admire beauty, but appraised it, and I knew with a heavy heart that the day we had planned for, the day we hoped would never come, was finally approaching. The test was no longer just for my son, it was for her, and I had a terrible feeling she was going to fail spectacularly. That's why I installed the new lock. That's why the game was about to change. My promise to Ruby was that I would protect our son, not just his inheritance, but his character. And to do that, I first had to reveal the true character of the woman he had married. The day the line was drawn was a sunny Sunday afternoon about a year ago. David had called me the week before, his voice filled with a nervous excitement I hadn't heard in years. "Dad," he'd said, "I've met someone special, and I want you to meet her." I was happy for him. Since my Ruby had passed, David had been my rock, but his own life had seemed to be on hold. He was a good man, a kind man, but he had a gentleness about him that the sharp-edged women of Los Angeles seemed to find uninteresting. So when he told me about Madison, I felt a genuine surge of fatherly hope. I was in the living room dusting the frame of a photo of Ruby that sat on the mantelpiece when they arrived. "She would have loved to see you, this happy son," I whispered to the empty room. "I hope she's the one." Then the doorbell rang. I opened the door, and there she was, Madison. She was everything David had described and more. She was tall, with honey blonde hair that caught the afternoon light, and a smile so bright and dazzling it seemed to generate its own electricity. She was dressed in an elegant, simple white dress that probably cost more than my first car. She looked at me with wide, intelligent blue eyes and extended a hand. "It is such an honor to finally meet you, Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice a warm, melodic sound. Her handshake was firm, confident. On the surface, she was perfect. "Please call me Elias," I said, smiling back. "Any woman who can make my son this happy is welcome in my home." David was beaming, his face alight with a puppy dog pride and affection that was almost painful to watch. "I told you you'd love her, Dad." We made small talk for a few minutes. She was a marketing executive, she said, for a high-end fashion brand. She talked about a recent trip to Paris, about a charity gala she was helping to organize. She was polished, articulate, and utterly charming. I wanted to like her. For my son's sake, I truly did. "Dad, why don't you give Madison the grand tour?" David suggested. "I'd love that," Madison said, her blue eyes sparkling. "David's told me so much about this house. He says you designed it yourself." "My wife and I did, yes," I said, leading them through the living room. a long time ago. And that's when the interrogation began. It was so subtle, so skillfully done that I'm sure my son didn't even notice it. But I did. As a man who spent 40 years creating illusions, I am an expert at spotting a performance, and Madison was a master. She would wrap each question in a delicate silken compliment. "Oh, Elias, this architecture is absolutely stunning," she exclaimed, running her hand along the teak room divider. "True mid-century modern is so rare. A house like this in this neighborhood with this kind of history, but it must be priceless." She's not asking about its history, I thought. She's asking about its price. I just smiled. It's priceless to me, yes. A lot of good memories. We moved to the wall where a large abstract painting, a piece I had bought from a struggling artist friend in the 70s, was hanging. "And this painting, it's so powerful," she said, her head tilted in a perfect imitation of artistic appreciation. "The artist, is he well known? Is it a good investment?" was the question she was really asking. "Just a local artist I admired," I replied, my smile feeling a little tighter. In the dining room, her eyes went straight to the simple, elegant dining set Ruby and I had cherished. "My goodness," she breathed. "Is that an original Eames? The craftsmanship is exquisite." She was no longer even bothering to hide the fact that she was conducting a mental inventory of my life, placing a price tag on every object, every memory. David just followed along, his face filled with pride that Madison appreciated our home. He didn't see what I saw. He didn't see the cold, calculating glint in her eyes. He didn't notice that not once did she ask about the memories themselves. She never said, "You must have had some wonderful family dinners here." She only asked about the table. He didn't see that she wasn't looking at a home. She was looking at an estate. The tour eventually led us down the long, dimly lit hallway toward the back of the house, the hallway that ended with the old, heavy oak door, the basement door. She stopped in front of it, a theatrical shiver of excitement passing through her. "Well now," she said, her voice a playful, teasing whisper, "what's behind the mystery door?" I saw David tense up just a little. "Oh, that's just Dad's basement," he said, the old, awkward explanation sounding strange in the presence of this new woman. It's off limits." "Off limits?" Madison said, her eyes lighting up with that bright, predatory curiosity that I would come to know so well. She looked from David's uncomfortable face to mine, her smile widening. "How intriguing. Every good house should have a secret." She laughed, a beautiful tinkling sound that did not reach her eyes. And in that moment, I saw it. A quick, almost imperceptible flash of intense, hungry calculation in her gaze before she covered it again with her charming smile. It was the look of a wolf that has just scented a wounded animal, and I knew with a sudden sinking feeling in my heart that I had just met the person who would without a doubt try to break the one unbreakable rule of my house. The familiar stranger had arrived, and the Cold War had just begun. I watched her as she laughed, that beautiful tinkling sound that seemed so full of light and joy. My son David was completely captivated, laughing along with her, his face a picture of pure adoration. But I wasn't looking at her smile. I was looking at her eyes. And in that brief, unguarded moment, as her gaze flickered from the basement door back to my son, I saw it. It was a look I knew all too well. It was a look of professional assessment, a look of hungry, calculating appraisal. It was the look of a predator. I've spent my entire life in the business of make-believe. For 40 years, I was a master prop designer in Hollywood. I worked on dozens of films, from sweeping historical epics to gritty black and white noir thrillers. My job was to create reality out of illusion. I learned to study people, to understand character, to know what a thing says about the person who owns it. And I worked with the greatest actors of a generation. I watched them build characters from the ground up. I saw how a simple glance, a slight shift in posture, a carefully chosen word could reveal the deepest truths of a person's soul. And as I looked at Madison, I felt like I was back on a dusty studio backlot in the 1980s. I remembered a specific film, a thriller about a beautiful woman who marries a wealthy older man for his fortune. I was working with the lead actress, a brilliant performer. I remember the director taking her aside before a scene. He said, "Remember, my dear, when you look at him, you are not looking at a man you love. You are looking at a bank vault with a heartbeat. Look at him like you are trying to figure out the combination." That was it. That was the look. The look I saw in Madison's eyes as she looked at my son as her gaze swept over my house. She wasn't seeing a family, she was seeing a vault, and she was already trying to figure out the combination. I am an expert in fakes. I've made fake gold bars that felt real fake diamonds that sparkled under the studio lights, fake Rembrandt paintings that could fool a casual observer. I know how to spot an illusion because I have spent my life building them. And Madison, she was the most convincing, most beautifully crafted illusion I had ever seen in my life. Her charm was a costume. Her laughter was a special effect. Her love for my son was a performance. A deep, profound sadness settled over me, a cold counterpoint to the warm, happy atmosphere in the room. My son, my good, kind, and trusting son, was completely under her spell. He saw a leading lady, the woman of his dreams. I saw a villain, the antagonist of a story whose tragic ending I could already see with perfect, painful clarity. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that our quiet little family drama was about to become a high-stakes thriller. And the part I would have to play was not one I had ever wanted. The Sunday after I met Madison, I made a phone call. Not to my son, but to a high-end security firm that specialized in custom installations. On Monday morning, a discreet, unmarked van was parked in my driveway, and a quiet professional technician began the process of removing the old familiar lock from my basement door. I stood in the hallway, supervising the work, a cup of coffee in my hand. The old lock had been there for 50 years. It was a heavy brass thing, solid and dependable. I had installed it myself. It used a simple skeleton key, a key that had hung on a hook in my office, untouched and unbothered for decades. Watching the technician drill it out felt like a small, necessary surgery on the body of my house. The new lock was a different beast altogether. It was a sleek black keypad flush-mounted to the doorframe with a small, discreet biometric scanner just below it. It was cold, impersonal, and brutally efficient. It was a statement. I was explaining to the technician where I wanted the control panel hidden when I heard the front door open. "Dad, we were in the neighborhood and thought we'd surprise you." It was David's voice, and Madison's. They had dropped by unannounced, something David rarely did. My heart rate quickened, but I kept my face calm. The test was beginning sooner than I had anticipated. They walked down the hallway and stopped, their faces a picture of surprise. David looked at the technician, at the tools on the floor, and at the gaping hole where the old lock used to be. He looked hurt. "Dad," he asked, his voice full of a quiet confusion. "What's all this? What happened to the old lock?" This was my first performance, my first line in the new play. I feigned a flustered, slightly embarrassed expression, as if they had caught me in the middle of a private matter. "Oh, David. Madison. I wasn't expecting you," I said, wringing my hands a little for effect. "It's just an upgrade. You know how the insurance company is, a lot of nonsense. They did a review of my policy, and with my collection of old movie props and memorabilia, they insisted on a modern security system for the basement storage. Something about their liability. A lot of fuss over nothing, but you have to keep them happy, I suppose. The excuse was plausible, logical, and had just the right amount of dismissive grumbling from an old man annoyed by bureaucracy. It was designed to answer David's question and soothe his hurt feelings. And it worked. "Oh," he said, his shoulders relaxing. "The insurance company. Right, that makes sense." He saw a problem being solved. Madison, however, saw something entirely different. She wasn't hurt or confused. She was fascinated. While David stood awkwardly in the hallway, she moved forward, her eyes gleaming with an intense, undisguised interest. She stepped around the technician's toolbox and examined the new keypad, her head tilted. "Wow, Elias," she said, her voice a purr of admiration. "That is a serious piece of hardware. A coded lock and a fingerprint scanner. Your collection must be incredibly valuable to need all that." "David sees a new lock," I thought as I watched her. "She sees a vault door. It's mostly just sentimental value, I'm afraid," I said, trying to sound modest. "I find that hard to believe," she said, her smile widening. She ran a finger over the smooth black surface of the keypad. "Does it have an alarm too? What happens if someone tries the wrong code too many times?" Her questions were sharp, probing, a rapid-fire interrogation disguised as innocent, girlish curiosity. She was no longer asking about the house. She was asking about its defenses. She was a general surveying the fortifications of the castle she intended to conquer. "I believe it just shuts down for an hour," I said, feigning a lack of interest. The technician was just explaining it. "It all seems very complicated to me." How fascinating, she breathed. It's like having a real secret vault right here in the house. You must tell me the code sometime, just in case of an emergency, of course." She laughed, that light tinkling sound that now set my teeth on edge. David looked uncomfortable. "Madison," he said, his voice a low warning, "it's Dad's private space." She turned to him, her eyes wide with a look of perfect innocence. "Of course, darling. I was only joking." But when she looked back at the door, the look in her eyes was not a joke. It was a promise. The technician finished his work. He showed me how to set the code and program my fingerprint, a process I pretended to find difficult and confusing. He handed me the instruction manual and, with a nod, packed his tools and left. The three of us were left standing in the hallway, staring at the new lock. It was a blank, silent, and formidable presence on the old oak door. It was no longer just a door to a room. It was a statement. It was a barrier. And I could see with absolute chilling clarity in the hungry, calculating glint in my daughter-in-law's eyes that it was a challenge she had every intention of accepting. The technician finished his work, gave me a quick tutorial, which I pretended to find baffling, and then left his footsteps echoing down the hall. The three of us remained standing in a strained, silent triangle, our eyes fixed on the new lock. It was a blank, black, digital face, a stark modern scar on the old oak door. It hummed with a quiet electronic potential. I looked at my son David. His face was a study in quiet conflict. He was looking at the lock not as a piece of hardware, but as a symbol. I could see the hurt in his eyes. The old lock, the simple key. That was part of the familiar landscape of his childhood. This new thing with its codes and its scanners was a barrier. A cold, formal declaration that a part of his father's house and perhaps his father's life was now officially and irrevocably closed to him. He saw a new distance between us, and it pained him. But when I looked at Madison, I saw something entirely different. There was no hurt in her eyes, no sadness. Her face was alight with a singular, brilliant emotion confirmation. She was staring at the lock with the intense, focused glee of a prospector who has just struck gold. Her mind was racing. I could almost hear the gears turning behind her beautiful blue eyes. An insurance requirement, she was thinking. No. No one spends this kind of money on a lock for a room full of dusty old movie props. This is a vault door. He's just confirmed it. The old man is hiding something. Something incredibly, fantastically valuable. She wasn't looking at a door. She was looking at a treasure chest, and I had just handed her the map. The faint, almost imperceptible curve of her lips told me everything. She was convinced now. She believed with every fiber of her greedy soul that behind that door lay the solution to all her desires, the key to the life she felt she deserved. She saw gold bars and stacks of cash, rare art, and priceless jewels. The mystery of the basement was no longer just a curiosity. It had become the central obsession of her life. And as I watched her, as I saw the hunger in her eyes, I didn't feel anger. I felt a profound and heavy sadness, but underneath it, a grim, cold satisfaction. The first move of the game had been played. The bait had been taken so completely, so perfectly. Ruby's plan, our plan, was working. My wife had always said that to catch a certain kind of predator, you don't hide the prize. You put it in a beautiful, glittering cage and let them trap themselves trying to get to it. Madison was now staring at her cage. She finally tore her eyes away from the lock and turned to me, her face breaking into that dazzling 1,000-watt smile. It was the fakest thing I had ever seen in my life, and I spent 40 years in Hollywood. "Well," she said, her voice a cheerful, tinkling sound. "I feel so much safer already, Elias." I smiled back, a gentle, grandfatherly smile that was just as false as hers. "Me too, my dear," I said. "Me too." The game had begun. The week after we saw the new lock, the subject of my basement was a silent, unspoken thing between David and me. He didn't mention it when he called, and I didn't bring it up, but I knew it was there, a new cold presence in our relationship. I knew this because while David wasn't talking to me about it, he was undoubtedly talking to Madison. The whispers had begun. The scene as I had imagined it 1,000 times played out in their sterile, minimalist house in Santa Monica, a house with more glass and steel than warmth. It was a few nights after their visit. They were sitting on their low white sofa, a bottle of expensive wine open on the concrete coffee table between them. David was talking about a new project. He was designing a beachfront home for a wealthy client. Madison, an expert at feigning interest, listened with a supportive smile on her face. She waited for the right moment, the perfect opening. When he finished, she didn't comment on his work. She changed the subject, her voice a soft, loving purr. "Your father is such a fascinating man," she said, swirling the deep red wine in her glass. "So talented. That house. It's a masterpiece. I haven't been able to stop thinking about it." David's face lit up with pride. "It's something special, isn't it? He and my mom designed every inch of it." "It is," she said, her voice dropping slightly, becoming more intimate. "There's just one thing that makes me a little sad when I think about it." She let the sentence hang in the air, a perfectly cast fishing line with an irresistible lure. David, as she knew, he would took the bait. "Sad. What do you mean?" She looked at him, her eyes wide with a perfectly crafted expression of loving concern. "It's just that basement, darling. He's your father. You're his only son, and there's a whole floor of your childhood home, a part of his life that you've never been allowed to see. Doesn't that feel strange to you?" David's smile faltered. He shifted uncomfortably. "No, it's not like that, honey. It's just his thing. His private space. It's been that way since I was a kid. It's not about trust. It's just a quirk. You know, like how some people have a study they don't want anyone going into." Of course," she said, her voice soothing, placating. She reached out and placed her hand on his knee. "I'm not saying he's a bad father. He's wonderful. He adores you. I can see it. But a quirk becomes a secret when you install a vault door on it." She saw him flinch at the phrase vault door, and she knew she had him. "I'm not curious for me, darling," she continued, her voice now a gentle, concerned whisper. "I'm worried about you. I see how much you love and respect him. It must hurt just a little deep down to know there's a part of his life he's completely walled off from you. You're an architect, a man who builds homes, and you've never seen the foundation of your own." She used the word foundation deliberately. It was a word that meant something to him. "It's not a big deal, Madi," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. The poison was beginning to work its way into his system. He was looking at his own hands, the hands of a builder, and for the first time in 40 years, he was questioning the foundation of his own family. "And that new lock," she went on, pressing her advantage. "It's just so final, so impersonal. The old key was a symbol of a promise between a father and a son. A keypad, that's for strangers. It feels like he's trying to keep something safe, not just private. I just wonder what it is. Is he okay? Does he have financial troubles he's not telling you about? You hear all these stories about elderly people getting scammed." It was a brilliant move. She had just reframed her own greedy curiosity as a noble concern for his father's well-being. She was no longer the intruder. She was the protector. "My dad is fine with money," David said a little too quickly. "He's always been very responsible." "I'm sure he is," she said, her voice as smooth as silk. "But what if there's something else down there? Something valuable that he needs help managing? What if it's not about keeping you out, David, but about him being afraid to let you in to share the burden? He's 75. He's all alone in that big house. Maybe he needs his son's help, but he's too proud to ask for it." She had just given David a noble reason to break his promise. He wouldn't be breaking in to satisfy his own curiosity. He would be breaking in to help his father, to protect him. She saw the conflict on his face, the lifetime of loyalty to his father at war with the new, powerful loyalty to his wife. She knew she had planted the seed. Now all she had to do was let it grow. She leaned over and kissed him a soft, reassuring kiss. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "Let's not talk about it anymore. It's his house, his rules. I just love you, and I worry about you. That's all." She stood up and went to the kitchen to refill their wine glasses, leaving him alone on the sofa. He didn't say anything. He just stared at the blank wall, a new, troubled line etched on his brow. The whispers had found fertile ground. The first, deepest crack in the foundation of my son's promise had just appeared. And I knew with a grim certainty that it was only a matter of time before the whole thing came crashing down. The weeks following the installation of the new lock were a quiet Cold War. On the surface, everything was normal. David and Madison came for Sunday dinner just as they always had. We would talk about David's latest architectural project, Madison's marketing campaigns, the unusually warm weather. But beneath the placid surface of our conversations, a new powerful current of tension was flowing. I could feel Madison's eyes on me constantly. They were no longer just curious. They were probing, searching, trying to glean some clue from an offhand remark or a stray glance. Her conversation was a minefield of carefully laid casual questions. Did you have a productive week, Elias? Spend much time in your workshop? She'd ask, her voice a silken purr. The word workshop was now a code, a placeholder for the vault of treasure she was convinced lay behind the basement door. She was a hunter, and she was circling her prey, waiting for a moment of weakness and opportunity to strike. I knew I had to give her one. The moment came 3 weeks later, over a dinner of roast chicken and potatoes. The plan my wife Ruby and I had designed was not just a defensive one. It was a trap, and every good trap needs bait. Tonight I was going to set it. Well, I said, dabbing my mouth with a napkin after the main course. I have some interesting and rather unexpected news. David looked up, his expression one of polite interest. Madison, however, leaned forward slightly, her entire body suddenly alert, her eyes sharp and focused. An old colleague from my studio days called me this morning. I began weaving the fiction we had prepared so many years ago. The Museum of Modern Art in Chicago is doing a big retrospective on the films of the 1970s. They're putting together an exhibit of classic props and practical effects, and they've asked me to come and consult. Apparently my work on The Crimson Star is now considered a historical artifact. I chuckled, a dry, self-deprecating sound. Imagine that, all my old junk now in a museum. David's face lit up with genuine pride. Dad, that's fantastic. That's a huge honor. You have to go. I told them I was retired. I continued, but they were very persuasive. It seems like a nice opportunity to see the old city again. Madison's eyes were gleaming. I could see the frantic calculations happening behind them. A trip. He would be gone. The house would be empty. A business trip. She asked, her voice a perfect blend of supportive enthusiasm and casual inquiry. That's wonderful, Elias. For how long will you be gone? About 2 weeks, I think, I said, feigning a bit of elderly confusion. I leave on Tuesday morning. It's all very last minute, a bit of a rush. Don't you worry about a thing, she said, immediately placing her hand on David's arm. We'll take care of everything here. We'll water the plants, collect the mail. The house will be in good hands. Her smile was dazzling. It was the smile of a fox who had just been handed the keys to the henhouse. The rest of the dinner was a performance. I played the part of a slightly overwhelmed old man, a bit flustered by the sudden travel plans. She played the part of the doting, responsible daughter-in-law, assuring me that everything would be perfectly fine. The main event came as they were getting ready to leave. I stood up and snapped my fingers, a look of sudden, forgetful panic on my face. Oh, my mind, I said, shaking my head. It's like a sieve these days. David, I need to give you the emergency contact for the hotel and, the code for the new house alarm, in case you need to get in. I shuffled over to the small antique desk in the corner of the living room, pretending to be flustered, searching for a piece of paper. I pulled a small notepad and a pen from the drawer. I scribbled down the name of a hotel in Chicago and a phone number. Then I wrote down a 6-digit alarm code. Above it, on the same page, I had already written another set of numbers. I tore the page from the notepad, but I did it carelessly with the theatrical clumsiness of an old man. The page ripped unevenly, leaving the top third the part with the most interesting numbers still attached to the pad's spiral binding. I looked at the torn piece in my hand, feigning annoyance. Oh, for heaven's sake, I muttered. I handed the bottom, larger piece of the paper to David. Here you go, son. This has the hotel's number and the code for the main house alarm. Put it somewhere safe. David took the paper, folded it, and put it in his wallet. Got it, Dad. I then looked down at the remaining ripped piece on the notepad, which I had left in plain sight on the corner of the desk. On it were the first 4 digits of a 6-digit code under the heading, Basement. I tapped the notepad with my finger. Look what I did. Ah, well, it's probably not important. You won't need to go down there anyway. I then added the final crucial piece of the puzzle, a piece of bait so tempting she couldn't possibly resist it. It's just my and Ruby's anniversary anyway. August 14th. I can never remember the full code. I always have to write it down. It was a lie, of course. The code was a random string of numbers, but I had just given her the first 4 digits on the paper and a clue to find the last 2. I had given her a puzzle to solve, and I knew the personality of a true gold digger. They cannot resist a puzzle that leads to a prize. As David was putting his wallet away, his back was turned to Madison for just a second. In that second, I saw it. Her eyes quick as a snake's tongue darted to the notepad on the desk. She registered the word basement. She registered the 4 numbers. Her mind, I knew, was already putting the pieces together. August 14th, 0814. She had the last 2 digits. She had the full code. She created a small, brilliant distraction. "Oh, David, darling, did you remember to bring in that file from the car?" she asked, her voice pulling his attention away from me and towards the front door. As he turned, I saw her, quick as a flash, raise her phone, angle it towards the desk, and I heard the almost imperceptible click of the camera. She had it. She had the bait. They left a few minutes later. Madison gave me a particularly warm, lingering hug at the door. "Have a wonderful, wonderful trip, Elias," she whispered in my ear. "And don't you worry about a single thing. We will take perfect care of the house." I watched them walk to their car, my face a perfect mask of a forgetful, slightly flustered old man. But inside, a cold, grim satisfaction settled over me. The bait had been set, the mouse had just seen the cheese, and the maze was waiting. On the Tuesday morning I was scheduled to leave, David and Madison came to see me off. I played my part to perfection. I was a flustered, slightly sentimental old man, double-checking my suitcase, patting my pockets to make sure I had my wallet and keys. Madison was the picture of a doting daughter-in-law fussing over my tie, handing me a bottle of water for the road. "Now, are you sure you have everything, Elias?" she asked, her voice dripping with concern. "I think so, my dear," I said, sighing. "My mind is all over the place. So much to remember. Don't you worry about a thing," she said, giving me a warm hug. It felt as genuine as a $3 bill. "We'll take perfect care of the house. Just have a wonderful trip." I hugged my son. "You have the numbers in case you need anything." "Got them right here, Dad," he said, patting his wallet. "Have a great time. You deserve it." I got into the taxi, gave them a final frail wave, and watched them in the rearview mirror as we pulled away. They stood on the curb, waving the perfect, loving family. The moment the car turned the corner out of their sight, I leaned forward. "Take me to the Beverly Hilton, please," I told the driver. My business trip to Chicago was in fact a 2-week stay in a comfortable hotel suite less than 5 miles from my own house. I had packed a few good books, my laptop, and a pair of binoculars. My room had a perfect, if distant, view of the road leading up to my neighborhood. I was not a consultant for a museum. I was a spider sitting in the corner of my web waiting for the fly to make its move. And I didn't have to wait long. The first 2 days, according to the discrete security cameras I had access to on my laptop, Madison was a model of patience. She and David would come to the house in the evening, collect the mail, water the plants, and leave. But I could see her on the camera feed from the hallway, her eyes always lingering on the basement door. She was studying it. She was biding her time. The cat-and-mouse game began on the 3rd day. She arrived at the house alone in the middle of the afternoon, telling David she needed to pick up a package that was being delivered. The moment she was inside, she went straight to my office. I watched on my laptop, a grim satisfaction settling over me. The fly was beginning to explore the web. She was methodical, I had to give her that. She didn't tear the place apart. She was looking for a specific clue. August 14th, Ruby's and my anniversary. I had given her the lock. Now she was looking for the key. I watched as she went through my desk drawers, her movements quick and efficient. She was looking for old calendars, address books, anything that might have our anniversary circled. But I had cleared all of that out weeks ago. She found nothing. Next, she moved to the bookshelves. She pulled down old photo albums, her fingers flying through the plastic-covered pages. She was looking for a dated picture, a wedding photo, a party invitation. She found pictures of our wedding, of course. But I had been careful. Years ago, I had all our most important photos professionally digitized, and in the process, I had the dates on the physical copies subtly altered. The wedding photos she was looking at were stamped June 12, 1975. A false trail. I watched her face on the high-resolution camera. I saw the flicker of confusion, then the flash of annoyance. She tried the code, the 4 digits she had photographed, followed by 0612. The lock on the screen of her phone, which she was using to remotely view the keypad, flashed red. Access denied. Her frustration was palpable. She started to move faster now, her search becoming less methodical and more frantic. She went into my bedroom, into the walk-in closet where Ruby's clothes still hung just as she had left them. It felt like a violation watching this woman rifle through the sacred memories of my wife. She went through the pockets of Ruby's old coats, through her jewelry boxes, looking for an engraved locket, a dated memento. She found nothing. Ruby and I never went in for engraved trinkets. Our love was in the house we built, not in the jewelry we wore. After nearly 2 hours of fruitless searching, she gave up. She left the house, her face a mask of cold fury. The mouse had explored the maze and found only dead ends. That evening I watched the camera feed as she and David sat on their stark white sofa. She was playing the part of the concerned wife again. "I was at your dad's house today," she said, her voice soft. "And I don't know. I just have a strange feeling. He seems so forgetful lately. What if he's written that code down somewhere and forgotten about it? What if someone else finds it, with all those valuable things he has down there?" "He's fine," Maudie David said, but his voice was defensive. The seed of doubt she had planted was growing. "I just think," she said, placing a hand on his cheek, "that as his only son, you have a right to know what's going on, to make sure he's safe, to make sure his legacy is safe." She was a master turning her greed into a noble cause, a son's duty. I knew David, my good loyal David, wouldn't be able to resist that argument for long. The cat was no longer just exploring the maze. She was now trying to convince the other mouse to help her find the cheese. And I knew with a heavy heart that his resolve was beginning to crumble. The cat and mouse game continued for another week, a silent, tense chess match played in the quiet, sun-drenched rooms of my house. From my hotel suite, I watched as Madison's frustration grew. She had tried everything she could think of. She'd gone through old financial records looking for a birth date for Ruby. She'd searched online genealogy sites. But Ruby and I were private people. Our digital footprint was almost non-existent. Every path she took was a dead end, and I could see her patience wearing thin. I knew she was reaching her breaking point. A predator that cannot find its prey through stealth will eventually resort to force. The escalation came on a Friday night. It was the masterstroke of a brilliant and utterly ruthless marketing executive. She couldn't convince David with logic or seduction, so she decided to create a crisis, a fire so terrifying that he would be willing to break any promise to put it out. The scene as I watched it unfold on my laptop began with Madison bringing in the mail. She sorted through the letters with a theatrical boredom, then she stopped. She held up a large cream-colored envelope, its front bearing the logo of a major commercial lending firm. Her face, a mask of carefully constructed innocence, showed a flicker of confusion. "Darling," she called out. David was in his home office working on blueprints for a new client. "There's a strange letter here for you. It looks official and urgent." David came out a pencil behind his ear, his expression one of weary curiosity. He took the envelope from her. As he tore it open, Madison stood beside him, her hand on his arm, the picture of a supportive wife. I watched David's face as he read the letter. I watched the color drain from it. I watched his hand begin to tremble. The letter was a work of art, a masterpiece of forgery that Madison must have spent days crafting. Using her high-level design skills, she had perfectly replicated the bank's letterhead. The language inside was cold, brutal, and terrifyingly official. It was a notice of default. It stated that the primary investor on his biggest project, a boutique hotel in Malibu, had suddenly and unexpectedly pulled out due to a financial scandal of their own. It went on to explain that a clause in his contract, one he had likely overlooked, made him personally liable for a $250,000 collateral payment in the event of a primary investor default. The payment, the letter stated in cold, bold font, was due within 72 hours, or the project would be seized and a lawsuit for the full amount would be filed against him personally, an act that would not only bankrupt him, but would utterly destroy his professional reputation. It was a complete fabrication, of course, a lie from start to finish. But it was a brilliant one. It was a perfect, targeted attack on my son's deepest fears: failure and public humiliation. "No," he whispered, the paper rattling in his hand. "No, this can't be right. It's a mistake." "What is it?" David Madison asked, her voice a gasp of perfectly performed terror. He showed her the letter. She read it, her eyes widening with every line. Then she looked up at him, her beautiful face a mask of crumbling despair. $250,000, she breathed. "In 3 days, David, we don't have that. We don't have a tenth of that. It's a mistake," he insisted, his voice rising in panic. He pulled out his phone, his fingers fumbling. "I'm calling my lawyer. I'm calling the bank." This was the moment Madison had been waiting for. She grabbed his arm, her eyes now streaming with tears, her voice a desperate pleading sob. "No, David, don't you see? There's no time. The letter says 72 hours. By the time the lawyers even return your call, it will be too late. Your career will be over. Everything you've worked for, everything we've built, it will be gone." She was a masterful actress. Her panic was so real, so absolute, that it fueled his own. He sank onto their white sofa, his head in his hands, the letter lying on the floor at his feet. "What are we going to do?" he mumbled, his voice the sound of a man in utter despair. "We're ruined." Madison knelt in front of him, her hands on his knees, her face a picture of tear-streaked devotion. She let him sit in his despair for a long moment. She let him feel the full, crushing weight of his failure. And then, as if the thought were a reluctant, last-ditch idea that had just occurred to her, she delivered the killing blow. "David," she whispered, her voice so soft it was almost inaudible. I know this is crazy, and I know you made a promise to your father, a promise you have kept your entire life." He looked up at her, his eyes hollow. "But your father," she continued, her voice trembling with a fake, desperate hope. "That basement, the lock, the stories. Elias is a wealthy man, David, a successful man. Whatever he has down there, it could save us. It could save you. Your career, everything we've built." "No," he said, shaking his head. "I can't, Maddie. I promised him." "A promise," she cried, her voice rising with a perfectly pitched note of incredulous desperation. "You're talking about a promise when your entire life is about to be destroyed. Your father would understand. What kind of father would let his son's life be ruined over a silly secret room? This isn't about being a good son anymore, David. This is about survival. He's away. He will never have to know. We just go in, we take what we need to solve this problem, and we put everything back. It's not stealing, it's borrowing. From family." She put her arms around his neck, her body shaking with sobs. "Please, David," she wept into his shoulder. "Please don't let us lose everything. I'm begging you. Be the man of this house. Make a decision. Save us." I sat in my quiet hotel room miles away, watching the silent, grainy video feed on my laptop. I watched my son, my good, kind, and loyal son, being torn apart by the woman who was supposed to love him. I watched as his lifetime of integrity did battle with the immediate, terrifying fear of failure she had so expertly manufactured. It was the longest, most painful minute of my life. Finally, I saw him take a deep, shuddering breath. I saw a new, hard resolve settle in his eyes. The resolve of a desperate man. He stood up, pulling her with him. He looked down at her, his face a mask of guilt, fear, and grim determination. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay, we'll do it." I closed my laptop. I didn't need to see any more. The final piece of the trap was in place. The mouse, manipulated and terrified, was now leading the cat directly to the cheese. My heart ached for my son, for the promise he was about to break. But I also felt a cold, hard finality. The time for games was over. The time for consequences was about to begin. The moment of truth had arrived. The fake financial crisis Madison had so brilliantly engineered had worked perfectly. It had pushed David to a place where his lifelong promise to his father was now overshadowed by the immediate, terrifying fear of losing everything. He stood before the basement door, his face a pale mask of guilt and desperation, the numbers of the code a toxic secret in his mind. "Are you sure about this, Maddie?" He whispered, his hand hovering over the sleek black keypad. "Once we do this, there's no going back. We have to." Darling, Madison said, her voice a soft, urgent purr. She stood behind him, her hands on his shoulders, a supportive gesture that felt more like a push. "This isn't about breaking a promise anymore. This is about saving our future. Your father would understand. Now do it." With a final, shuddering breath of resignation, David lifted his hand and began to type. He entered the first 4 digits, the ones he had seen on the torn piece of paper from my desk. 4267. Then he hesitated. "His anniversary," Madison prompted. "August 14th. He typed the final 2 digits. 08. The keypad beeped, and for a heart-stopping moment nothing happened. Then with a soft, satisfying whir, the light on the keypad turned from red to green. A heavy metallic clunk echoed in the quiet hallway as the magnetic lock disengaged. They looked at each other, their eyes wide. The door was open. David reached out a trembling hand and pulled the heavy oak door toward him. It swung open silently, revealing not a dark, dusty staircase, but a wall of utter blackness. As the door clicked fully open, a wave of cool, dry, climate-controlled air washed over them, carrying with it a faint, sterile scent like the inside of a museum. Then a series of soft automatic lights began to flicker on, one after another, slowly, dramatically illuminating the room within. They both gasped. This was not a basement. This was a vault. The room was stunning, a minimalist, museum-quality display space. The floors were polished dark concrete. The walls were painted a matte black. A series of precisely aimed spotlights from the ceiling illuminated a collection that defied belief. On the far wall, a set of industrial-grade steel shelves held what looked like dozens of solid gold bars, each one stamped with the insignia of a Swiss bank. They gleamed under the spotlights, a breathtaking river of pure, unimaginable wealth. To their right, a series of museum-style glass display cases stood on black pedestals. Inside the first, a magnificent diamond necklace, the size of which Madison had only ever seen in movies, rested on a black velvet bust. In the next, a single perfect pigeon blood ruby as large as a robin's egg seemed to glow with an inner fire. In a third, a collection of vintage watches, Rolexes, Patek Philippe's. Their faces, a complex constellation of dials and gears, were arranged in a perfect gleaming row. In the center of the room, a single modern art sculpture, a swirling metallic piece that looked like something out of the Guggenheim, rested on a block of white marble. And on a small steel desk in the corner, a leather-bound ledger lay open. From the doorway, they could see the neat handwritten entries, columns of numbers next to names of offshore banks and stock portfolios, the totals running into the tens of millions of dollars. It was a treasure trove, a secret private hoard of staggering, mind-boggling wealth. It was the stuff of fantasy. David was frozen, his jaw slack, his mind completely unable to process what he was seeing. This was not a private collection. This looked like the secret vault of a Bond villain. The sheer scale of it was terrifying. Where had his father, the quiet, retired prop master, gotten all of this? The question was a scream in his mind. "Dad," he whispered to the empty room, "what is all this?" He was dazzled, but he was also deeply, profoundly frightened. He had not just broken a promise, he had stumbled into a secret so vast and so dangerous it felt like it could swallow him whole. Madison's reaction was different. After the initial choked gasp, a profound religious silence fell over her. She took a hesitant step into the room, then another. Her movements slow, reverent. She was a pilgrim who had just reached the Holy Land. Her breathing was shallow. Her eyes were wide, not with fear, but with a pure, unadulterated awe. She walked to the display case with the diamond necklace, her hand hovering over the glass, not daring to touch it. She let out a small, quiet sound, a half laugh, half sob. Then the awe began to curdle. It sharpened, it hardened, and it transformed into a raw, frantic, and possessive greed. The reverence was gone. Her eyes, which had been wide with wonder, now narrowed with calculation. The switch was instantaneous and terrifying. "Oh my God," she whispered, her voice a low, hungry growl. "Oh my God, David!" She spun around, her face flushed, her eyes burning with an intensity he had never seen before. "We're rich," she said the words, a breathless, triumphant hiss. "David, do you understand? We are rich." She pulled out her phone, her hands shaking, and began to take pictures. Not the pictures of a tourist, but the pictures of a looter, an auctioneer, an executor. She was no longer admiring the treasure, she was cataloging it. "We have to call someone," she said, her voice a frantic torrent of words. "An appraiser. No, not just one. We need several. We need to find out what all this is worth. That sculpture alone could be worth millions." "The watches. My God, the watches." David finally snapped out of his trance. The fear was now overwhelming the awe. "Maddie, no," he said, his voice shaking. "We shouldn't be here. This is wrong. We need to close the door. We need to leave." "Leave!" she shrieked, spinning to face him, her face a mask of furious disbelief. "Are you insane? Leave. David, this is it. This is everything. This is the solution to all our problems, to all our dreams. Your father has been hoarding this, hiding it from you, from your own son, your entire life. This is yours. It's ours." She grabbed his hands, her grip surprisingly strong, her eyes burning with a feverish, terrifying light. "Don't you see? We did it, David. We won." He looked at his wife, at her face so beautiful and so completely consumed by a greed so profound it was monstrous. He looked at the impossible, glittering treasure that surrounded them. And he looked at the open door, the gateway to the life he had just destroyed. He hadn't just opened a basement. He had opened a Pandora's box. And the woman he loved had just transformed into a monster right before his eyes. I sat in the quiet of my hotel suite at the Beverly Hilton, the city lights of Los Angeles glittering below like a carpet of fallen stars. On the desk in front of me, my laptop was open, but I wasn't reading the news or checking emails. I was watching a silent movie. The star of the movie was my daughter-in-law, Madison. The grainy black and white footage was from the 4 discrete motion-activated cameras I had installed in my basement workshop, the stage my wife and I had so carefully designed. I had watched them break in. I had watched David, my son, his face, a mask of guilt and fear, punch in the code I had so carelessly revealed. I had watched the heavy door swing open and the lights flicker on, illuminating my masterpiece of deception. I had watched the awe and then the raw, naked greed dawn on Madison's face as she took in the sight of the fake gold bars, the worthless cut-glass jewels, and the collection of replica watches. And I had watched my son's awe curdle into a deep, profound terror. For the past hour, I had been watching Madison in a state of frenzied ecstasy. She was pacing the polished concrete floor like a caged tigress, her phone pressed to her ear. She was no longer whispering. She was talking loudly, her voice sharp and commanding, making deals, arranging for her future. David was a ghost in the background, a pale, horrified figure who would occasionally try to reason with her, only to be dismissed with a wave of her hand. She was in her element. She had found the treasure, and now she was hiring the pirates to help her haul it away. My own phone, which I had placed on the desk beside the laptop, suddenly buzzed to life. The screen lit up with a picture of my son. It was time for my performance. I took a deep, steadying breath, closed my eyes for a moment to summon the character of the frail, forgetful old man I had been rehearsing, and answered the call. I made sure to let my voice sound groggy and confused, as if I had been woken from a deep sleep. "David," I said, my voice a weak, raspy whisper. "Son, what is it? It's after midnight here. Is everything all right? Dad?" His voice was a frantic, panicked torrent of words, exactly as I had expected. "Dad, thank God you answered. Something terrible has happened. It's Madison." "Madison," I said, injecting a note of alarm into my voice. "Is she all right? Was there an accident?" "No, Dad, it's the basement," he stammered, the words tumbling over each other in his haste. I'm so sorry. Dad, I broke my promise. She made me do it. There was this letter, this financial crisis, and she said it was the only way." I let him confess. His voice choked with shame and panic. I listened, my face a mask of dawning horror, while inside a cold, grim satisfaction settled over me. He was telling me the whole story, every detail of her masterful manipulation. It was even more brazen than I had imagined. "And the stuff, Dad," he continued, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. "The gold, the jewels. I don't know where you got it all, but Madison, she's lost her mind. She thinks we're rich. She thinks we're millionaires." This was the cue. This was the line from the teaser. "Dad," he said, his voice cracking with desperation, "she went into the basement and she's on the phone. She's been on the phone for an hour. She's calling appraisers, dealers. These shady-sounding people, Dad. She's trying to sell everything. She's on the phone right now with some guy talking about percentages and offshore wire transfers." Now it was time for my big scene. What I yelled into the phone, my voice a perfect imitation of a shocked, helpless old man. "What are you talking about, son appraisers, David? You have to stop her. That's our family's history. That's everything your mother and I built. You can't let her do that." "I'm trying, Dad, but she won't listen to me," he cried. "She's like a different person. She's yelling at me, telling me this is her money, now our money. She's talking about flying to Switzerland. I think she's going to rob you, Dad. I think she's going to take everything and run." My internal monologue was cold and clear. The mouse has not only taken the cheese, she's trying to drag the whole trap away with her. Perfect. Absolutely perfect. But my voice on the phone was a mask of rising panic. "Listen to me, son," I said, my voice shaking. "You have to stall her. Do whatever it takes. Tell her you need to wait for the banks to open. Tell her you need to talk to a lawyer to make sure it's all legal. Tell her I'm on my way. I'll catch the first flight in the morning. I'll be there by noon tomorrow. Just don't let her leave that house with anything. Do you understand me, David? You have to keep her there." The purpose of my instructions was simple. I had to keep the actors on the stage until the final scene could play out. Okay, Dad, he said, his voice a little steadier now that he had a mission. Okay, I'll try. Just, please hurry. I'm on my way, son, I said, and I hung up the phone. I sat there for a moment in the silence of the hotel room. The mask of the panicked, forgetful old man dropped away instantly. My face was calm. My breathing was steady. My eyes were cold and hard and focused. The time for acting was almost over. I picked up my phone again and made a second call, this one to a number I knew by heart. It rang once. Maya. I said, my voice no longer weak but clear and commanding. It's me. The trap is sprung. They're all inside. Madison is on the phone with the appraisers right now. They're planning the heist. I could almost hear the smile in my lawyer's voice on the other end. Excellent, she said. The LAPD fraud unit is on standby. I'll make the call. They'll be in position within the hour. Good, I said. It's time to start phase 2. I ended the call and closed my laptop. The silent movie was over. I was no longer just an observer. I had given the command. The real trap, the one made not of fake gold and illusions but of hard, cold, and unforgiving law, was about to close. The curtain was about to rise on the final act. The call from my son came just after 1 a.m. I was sitting in the dark of my hotel suite, a glass of water on the table, the silent black and white movie of my daughter-in-law's greed playing out on my laptop screen. When my phone lit up with David's picture, I felt a jolt, not of surprise but of grim finality. It was showtime. I took a deep, steadying breath, closed my eyes for a moment to summon the character of the frail, forgetful old man I had been rehearsing, and answered the call. I made sure to let my voice sound groggy and confused, as if I had been woken from a deep sleep. David, I said, my voice a weak, raspy whisper. Son, what is it? It's after midnight here in Chicago. Is everything all right, Dad? His voice was a frantic, panicked torrent of words, exactly as I had expected. Dad, thank God you answered. Something terrible has happened. It's Madison. Madison, I said, injecting a note of pure fatherly alarm into my voice. Is she all right? Was there an accident? What's happened? I stood up from my chair and began to pace, letting the sound of my movement and my increasingly ragged breathing add to the performance. No, Dad, it's the basement. He stammered the words, tumbling over each other in his haste. I'm so sorry, Dad. I broke my promise. It's all my fault. She made me do it. There was this letter, this fake financial crisis. She set it all up to trick me, and she said it was the only way. I let him confess, his voice choked with a torrent of shame and panic and guilt. I listened, my face a mask of dawning horror, while inside a cold, grim satisfaction settled over me. He was telling me the whole story, every detail of her masterful manipulation. It was even more brazen, more sociopathic than I had imagined. He was confessing his own weakness, but more importantly, he was giving me a verbal first-hand account of her criminal intent. And the stuff, Dad, he continued, his voice dropping to a terrified whisper. The gold, the jewels. I don't know where you got it all, but Madison, she's lost her mind. She thinks we're rich. She thinks we're multimillionaires. This was the cue. This was the line from the teaser the moment the true drama began. Dad, he said, his voice cracking with desperation, she went into the basement and she's on the phone. She's been on the phone for an hour, Dad. She's calling appraisers, dealers, these shady-sounding people. She's trying to sell everything. She's on the phone right now with some guy named Silas talking about percentages and offshore wire transfers and how quickly they can liquidate the assets. Now it was time for my big scene. I let out a sound, a choked guttural cry of pure anguish. What I yelled into the phone, my voice a perfect imitation of a shocked, helpless, and heartbroken old man. What are you talking about, son appraisers? David, you have to stop her. That's our family's history. That's everything your mother and I built. You can't let her do that. That's not just props, son. That's our life savings. That's everything. I added the lie about it being real, a piece of gasoline thrown onto the fire of her greed, a lie that would be her ultimate undoing. I'm trying, Dad, but she won't listen to me, he cried, his voice breaking. She's like a different person. She's locked me out of the basement. She's yelling at me, telling me this is her money now, our money. She's talking about flying to Switzerland. I think she's going to rob you, Dad. I think she's going to take everything and run. My internal monologue was cold and clear. The mouse has not only taken the cheese, she's trying to drag the whole trap away with her. perfect, absolutely perfect. But my voice on the phone was a mask of rising panic. "Listen to me, son," I said, my voice shaking with a manufactured terror. "You have to stall her. Do whatever it takes. Tell her you need to wait for the banks to open in the morning. Tell her you need to talk to a lawyer to make sure it's all legal to protect her interests. Tell her I'm on my way. I'll charter a private flight. I'll catch the first flight in the morning. I'll be there by noon tomorrow. Just don't let her leave that house with anything." Do you understand me, David? You have to keep her there. For your mother's sake, keep her in that house. The purpose of my instructions was simple. I had to keep the actors on the stage until the final scene could play out. I had to make sure the criminals and the stolen goods were all in one place when the curtain finally fell. "Okay, Dad," he said, his voice a little steadier now that he had a mission. "Okay, I'll try. I'll do anything. Just please hurry." "I'm on my way, son," I said, and with a final choked sob for effect, I hung up the phone. I stood there for a moment in the silence of the hotel room. The mask of the panicked, forgetful, heartbroken old man dropped away instantly. My breathing returned to normal. My face, which had been contorted in a performance of grief, became calm and expressionless. My eyes were cold and hard and focused. The time for acting was almost over. I had played my part. I had delivered my lines. And now it was time for the director to call action. I picked up my phone again and made a second call, this one to a number I knew by heart. It rang once. "Maya." I said, my voice no longer weak or frail, but clear and commanding. The voice of a man who has just set a very large, very precise machine in motion. "It's me. It's Elias. I was waiting for your call," her calm, professional voice replied. "The trap is sprung," I said. "They're all inside. Madison is in the basement with the assets. She is at this very moment on the phone with at least one of the men on the list. We provided a man named Silas, arranging the sale and transfer of the goods. We have a clear recorded conspiracy in progress. David is upstairs playing his part, stalling for time. All the actors are in position." I could almost hear the smile in my lawyer's voice on the other end. "Excellent," she said. "The LAPD fraud unit is on standby just as we planned. I'll make the call. They'll be in position within the hour, a discreet, unmarked surveillance team. They will wait for your signal." "Good," I said. "I'm leaving the hotel now. I'll be there in 20 minutes to oversee the finale. It's time to start phase 2. I ended the call and closed my laptop. The silent movie was over. I was no longer just an observer watching from a distance. I had given the command. The real trap, the one made not of fake gold and illusions, but of hard, cold, and unforgiving law, was about to close. I put on my jacket, my movements calm and deliberate. I was a prop master on his way to his final, greatest set. The curtain was about to rise on the final act, and I wouldn't miss it for the world. The phone call with my son ended, and I placed the receiver back in its cradle. The mask of the panicked, heartbroken old man dropped away instantly. My face, which had been contorted in a performance of grief, became calm and expressionless. My breathing was steady. My eyes were cold and hard and focused. The time for my acting was over. Now it was time to watch the show. I turned my full attention back to the laptop on the desk. On the screen, 4 black and white quadrants showed me the silent movie of my own home. The top left was the hallway camera showing the open basement door. The top right was the living room where I could see David, my poor broken son, pacing back and forth like a caged animal, running his hands through his hair. The bottom 2 cameras were inside the basement itself, the stage I had so carefully set. And on that stage, the star of our little drama was giving the performance of her life. Madison was in a state of manic, feverish energy. The initial awe she had felt upon entering the vault had been completely consumed by a raw, frantic greed that was almost terrifying to watch. She was no longer a visitor in a museum. She was a conqueror, and this was her treasure, her spoils of war. She paced the polished concrete floor, her phone pressed to her ear, her voice a low, urgent, and commanding hiss that the hidden microphones picked up with perfect clarity. I watched as she made her first call. "Silas." "It's Madison Thorne," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Yes, that Thorne. Stop what you're doing. You need to get over here. Now." She listened for a moment, a look of impatience on her face. "No, I'm not exaggerating. It's better than I told you. It's better than you can possibly imagine. I'm talking about a life-changing score, Silas. The kind of thing you only ever see in movies. A bitter irony, considering everything in the room was in fact from the movies. Bring your full authentication kit, she continued, her voice sharp with authority. The gold looks real, but I want to be sure. And Silas, be discreet. No marked vans. Park down the street. Come to the back entrance. The son is here, but he's having a moment. He won't be a problem. She hung up and immediately began tapping at her phone, her fingers flying. I could see on the screen that she was sending the pictures she had taken earlier, blasting them out to a list of contacts. She wasn't just looking for one buyer. She was trying to create a bidding war to maximize her profit on my fake treasure. The sheer breathtaking audacity of it was something to behold. David appeared in the doorway of the basement, his face pale, his eyes pleading. "Maddie, please," he begged, his voice a hoarse whisper. "Stop. Dad is on his way. He's catching the first flight. We have to wait for him." Madison didn't even look at him. She was scrolling through her contacts, already dialing another number. "Wait," she scoffed the word, a blade of pure contempt. "Wait for what, David? For your father to come back and lock it all up again. For him to call the police. Don't be a fool. This is our chance. This is my chance. I am not going to let a fortune slip through my fingers because you are having a sudden, pathetic crisis of conscience. It's his," David cried, his voice breaking. "It's his life savings. We can't just steal it." She finally turned to face him, her eyes blazing with a cold, merciless fire. "He was hiding it from you, David, his own son. For 40 years. If that's not a betrayal, I don't know what is. He doesn't deserve this. We do. I do. I am the one who had the courage to do what was necessary. Now get out of my way and let me work." She turned her back on him and put the phone to her ear again. "Marco." "It's Jessica," she said, and my blood ran cold. She was using a different name. She was deeper in this world than I had even imagined. "I have a collection of vintage timepieces that need to be moved, quietly and quickly. Patek Rolex, the good stuff. What's your commission?" "No, that's too high. I have other offers. Call me back in 10 minutes with a better number." I sat back in my chair in the quiet of my hotel room, a silent observer to the destruction of my son's marriage and the self-immolation of my daughter-in-law. I felt a profound disgust, but also a grim satisfaction. The cameras were recording everything, every damning word, every conspiratorial phone call. She wasn't just a simple thief blinded by a sudden opportunity. She was an active, willing co-conspirator in a criminal enterprise. She was burying herself shovelful by shovelful. David had retreated a defeated ghost in his own home. He was slumped on the living room sofa, his head in his hands. He had done his part. He had stalled her just as I had asked. He had kept her on the stage. Madison finished her calls. She stood in the middle of the fake vault, her arms crossed her body, practically vibrating with a triumphant manic energy. She looked at the fake gold, the fake diamonds, the fake legacy of a life well lived, and she saw her own glorious future. She was the queen of a kingdom of illusions. From a small external microphone feed, I heard the faint sound of a car pulling up quietly down the street. The first of her appraisers was arriving. The final actors were taking their places. I looked at the screen at this woman who had so thoroughly desecrated my family. "The stage is set, Madison," I whispered to the silent room. "Time to bring down the curtain." The drive from the Beverly Hilton to my house in the hills took less than 20 minutes, but it felt like a lifetime. The city lights blurred past my window, a river of gold and red, but I saw none of it. My focus was absolute, my mind as clear and as cold as a block of ice. I was a general driving to the front lines for the final decisive battle of a war that had been planned years in advance. There was a deep, aching sorrow in my heart for my son, for the pain he was about to endure. But there was no hesitation. There was only the grim, unyielding necessity of what had to be done. I met them a block away from my house on a dark, quiet side street under the shade of a massive jacaranda tree. 2 unmarked dark sedans were parked by the curb, their interiors dark, their presence a quiet professional threat. Maya Jones was waiting for me, standing next to the lead car. Beside her was a tall, weary-looking man in a rumpled suit who introduced himself as Detective Miller of the LAPD Artifice and Fraud Division. Mr. Thorne Miller said, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. "Your lawyer has briefed me. It's an unconventional setup." "I'm an unconventional man, Detective," I replied. "My team is in position," he said, gesturing to the other men in the cars. "We have silent entry capability. "How do you want to do this?" Quietly, I said. "No sirens, no lights. They're in the basement, a soundproofed room. They won't hear us come in. I want them caught in the act." Maya stepped forward. "Elias," she said, her voice full of a concern that went beyond our professional relationship. "Are you sure you want to be there for this? It's going to be unpleasant." "I have to be," I said, my voice firm. "I started this. I have to be there to finish it." She nodded, understanding. We approached the house on foot, a silent team of ghosts moving through the warm Los Angeles night. The house was quiet, but lights were on inside. My heart pounded in my chest, a slow, heavy drumbeat of anticipation. I thought of David, my son alone in there, caught between his terror and his guilt. I pulled the key from my pocket and slipped it into the front door lock. The lock turned with a barely audible click. I pushed the door open and we stepped inside. The scene in the living room was one of quiet devastation. David was sitting on the floor, his back against the sofa, his head in his hands. He looked up as we entered, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror, shame, and a profound, desperate relief. He saw me then, the plainclothes officers behind me, and he seemed to crumble, all the fight going out of him. 2 officers stayed with him, their presence a quiet, reassuring authority. The rest of us moved on our footsteps, silent on the thick rugs. We moved down the long, dark hallway towards the basement. Just as the camera feed had shown, the heavy oak door was slightly ajar, a sliver of bright artificial light spilling out along with the low, excited murmur of voices. They were still in there. They were still counting their fake treasure. Miller gave a single sharp nod to his team. They drew their weapons, their movements fluid and economical. I stood back by the doorway with Maya, my heart pounding, a spectator at the final explosive scene of my own movie. On Miller's silent hand signal, they moved. They didn't kick the door in. They flowed through it, a silent, dark wave of law and consequence. LAPD Miller's voice boomed, the sound shattering the quiet excitement in the room. "Nobody move. Hands where I can see them." The scene inside was a perfect tableau of greed. Madison was standing by a glass display case, a pair of what she thought were priceless sapphire earrings in her hand. Across the room, 3 men, her appraisers, were huddled around a table, a jeweler's loupe pressed to one man's eye as he examined a fake diamond, another testing a painted lead bar with an acid kit. They were so engrossed, so consumed by their avarice, that they were completely oblivious. They froze their faces, a comical, simultaneous picture of pure, unadulterated shock. The jeweler's loupe dropped from one man's eye. The man with the gold bar dropped it on the table with a dull, unimpressive thud. Madison was the last to react. She spun around her face, a mask of furious indignation, ready to lash out at whoever had dared to interrupt her. And then she saw me standing in the doorway. Her face in that moment was a masterpiece of emotional collapse. First there was confusion. I was supposed to be in Chicago. Then came the dawning, sickening realization. Her eyes darted from me to the police officers to Maya Jones and back to me. The trap. It was a trap. The confusion turned to disbelief. The disbelief to a wild, cornered animal terror. And finally, as the handcuffs were being snapped onto her wrists, her terror curdled into a final, ugly expression of pure, venomous hatred. All of it directed at me. The officers were professional, efficient. They cuffed Madison and her 3 bewildered accomplices, reading them their rights in a calm, monotone voice that was a stark contrast to the high-stakes drama they had just interrupted. As they were leading her out, her eyes locked with mine. The beautiful, charming mask was completely gone. All that was left was the raw, ugly face of her own greed. "You!" she shrieked, her voice a ragged, desperate sound. "You set me up. This was all a setup." I looked at her, at this woman who had so thoroughly destroyed my son's life, who had tried to steal the legacy of my wife. I felt no anger. I felt no triumph. I just felt a deep, profound, and weary sadness. "No Madison," I said, my voice quiet but carrying across the now silent room. "You set yourself up." I gestured to the room, to the fake gold, to the worthless jewels, to the beautiful empty stage I had built for her. I just built the theater. They led her away, her curses and threats echoing down the hallway until they were finally silenced by the closing of the front door. I stood there for a long moment in the doorway of my beautiful fake vault, the air thick with the smell of failure and consequence. The trap had been sprung, the curtain had come down, and the play was finally over. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cars parked outside painted silent strobing patterns on the walls of my living room. The house, usually a quiet sanctuary of memory and peace, was now a bustling crime scene filled with the quiet, efficient movements of uniformed officers and forensic technicians. Madison and her 3 accomplices were gone, taken away in separate unmarked cars, their dreams of a life-changing score having evaporated into a nightmare of handcuffs and consequences. My son David was sitting on the floor in the living room, his back against the sofa, his head in his hands. He hadn't said a word since they had led Madison away. He was a man in deep, profound shock, his entire world, the foundation of his marriage and his understanding of the woman he loved, having been systematically demolished in the space of an hour. I was in the basement, my so-called vault, with Maya and Detective Miller. The room was now crawling with police. They were photographing the fake gold bars, bagging the worthless crystal jewelry as evidence, dusting for fingerprints. It was a surreal sight. My beautiful, intricate stage was being dismantled by the very forces of reality I had summoned. Detective Miller stood in the middle of the room, shaking his head slowly as he looked at the open panel in the wall, at the bank of recording equipment and the high-definition monitor. "I have to say, Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice a low, gravelly sound of disbelief. "I've been in the fraud division for 20 years. I've seen some elaborate cons. But I have never ever seen a civilian setup this elaborate. You built all this." "It was my trade, detective," I said, my voice quiet. I walked over to the display case and picked up one of the replica Rolex watches. I popped the back off with a small tool from my pocket and showed him the cheap battery-powered quartz movement inside. For 40 years in Hollywood, I built illusions. My job was to make fake things look real. It seems I haven't lost my touch. He chuckled, a dry, weary sound. "You're telling me, these experts your daughter-in-law brought in, they're on our watch list. Small-time fences and fraud artists. They should have known better. But greed, it makes people stupid." Maya powered up the monitor again. "And it makes them talkative," she said. She played back one of the key audio clips for the detective, the one where Madison was on the phone with Silas. "I'm talking about a life-changing score, Silas, the kind of thing you only ever see in movies." Miller listened, a grim smile on his face. "A recorded conspiracy to commit grand larceny. It's a prosecutor's dream. She's not getting out of this, not with this kind of evidence." We stood there for another hour, walking the detective through the details of the setup. I explained how my late wife Ruby and I had designed the vault years ago as a test, a diagnostic tool, how we had hoped we would never have to use it. When I finished, Miller was silent for a long moment. "Your wife?" he said finally, a note of profound respect in his voice. "She must have been one hell of a woman. She was," I said, my heart aching with a sudden sharp pang of love and loss. Finally, the initial processing of the scene was complete. The police began to file out their work done for the night. The flashing lights outside were gone, leaving the house in a sudden heavy silence. Miller was the last to leave. "The district attorney's office will be in touch tomorrow, Mr. Thorne," he said, standing in the hallway. "They'll need a formal statement from you and from your son." He glanced towards the living room at David's still motionless form. "He's going to need you," he said, his voice softer now. "This is a lot for a person to process." "I know," I said. "Thank you, detective, for your professionalism." He just nodded and left, closing the front door behind him. And then we were alone, just me and my son in the quiet, violated house. Maya gave my arm a gentle squeeze. "I'll let myself out, Elias," she whispered. "Call me if you need anything. Anything at all." I was alone with David. I walked into the living room and stood before him. He didn't look up. "David," I said softly. He finally lifted his head. His face was a wreck, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow with a pain so deep it was hard to look at. "You knew," he whispered, his voice a broken, ravaged sound. "This whole time, you knew what she was." I knelt down in front of him, my old knees protesting. "Yes, son," I said, my voice thick with a sorrow that matched his own. I knew. Why, he asked the question, a raw cry of pain. "Why didn't you just tell me? Would you have believed me?" I asked gently. He looked away, and the silence was his answer. He knew he wouldn't have. He was too in love, too caught in her web. "Your mother and I, we designed this test for a reason," I explained. "Some truths are too painful to be told, son. They have to be seen. They have to be discovered. You had to see for yourself who she really was. I am so sorry that it had to be this way. But it was the only way to get you out. The only way to save you." He looked at me then, and for the first time the wall of resentment and misunderstanding that had been between us for the past year crumbled. He saw me, not as a secretive, untrusting old man, but as a father who had just performed a terrible, painful, and necessary act of love. He let out a long, shuddering sob, and he collapsed into my arms. I held my son, my 45-year-old son, as he wept like a little boy, his body shaking with the grief of a love that had been a lie and the shame of a trust he had broken. I held him tight, my own tears falling into his hair. The legal consequences for Madison were now in motion, but the personal consequences, the emotional wreckage left behind by her greed, were all around us. The first part of my plan was over, but as I held my broken child in my arms, I knew that the hardest part, the slow, quiet, and painful work of rebuilding, had only just begun. The police were gone. The flashing red and blue lights that had painted my walls with a chaotic strobing rhythm were replaced by a profound and heavy silence. The house, which had been a stage for a high-stakes drama just an hour before, was now just a quiet, empty crime scene. Madison and her crew had been taken downtown for booking. The circus was over. All that was left was the emotional wreckage. My son David was still sitting on the floor in the living room, his back against the sofa, his head in his hands. He hadn't moved. He hadn't said a word. He was a statue of shame and disbelief. Maya had quietly let herself out, leaving the two of us alone in the aftermath of the explosion I had so carefully engineered. I walked to the kitchen, my movements feeling slow and heavy, and made 2 cups of coffee, the familiar, simple ritual, a small anchor in the storm. I brought a mug to my son and placed it on the floor beside him. He didn't seem to notice. I sat down in my old armchair, the one piece of furniture that had been a silent witness to all of this, and I waited. The silence stretched thick and uncomfortable, punctuated only by the quiet, ragged sound of David's breathing. Finally, he lifted his head. His face was a wreck, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow with a pain so deep it was hard to look at. Why, he whispered, his voice a broken, ravaged sound. Why would you do all of this, Dad? The cameras, the fake gold, all of it. Why not just tell me you didn't like her? Why didn't you trust me? The question was a raw cry of pain, the accusation of a son who felt he had been betrayed, not just by his wife, but by his father as well. I took a slow sip of my coffee, gathering my thoughts. This was the most important conversation of our lives, and I knew that every word mattered. David. I began, my voice soft but clear. This was never about not trusting you. I have always trusted your heart. You are a good and loyal man. That is your greatest strength. But sometimes a person's greatest strength can also be their greatest weakness. I wasn't worried about your heart, son. I was worried about your kindness. I was worried that your goodness could be used as a weapon against you. He just stared at me, not understanding. Your mother, Ruby, I said, and the sound of her name filled the room with a gentle warmth. She saw the world with clear eyes. She was a romantic, but she was not a fool. She knew that people could be wonderful, but she also knew that greed was a sickness, a poison, that could turn good people into monsters. Years ago, we watched it happen to our friends the Hendersons. We watched their children tear each other apart over their father's inheritance, a beautiful family destroyed by a fight over money. We promised each other on that day that we would do everything in our power to protect our family from that same sickness. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on his. So we built a test, a character test, the basement son. It was never a vault to keep people out. It was a stage designed to see who would try to break in. The rule, the one I made you promise to keep all those years ago, it wasn't a punishment. It was a question, a quiet, lifelong question about your character. And for 35 years, David, you answered that question perfectly. You never wavered. You kept your promise. You passed the test with flying colors. I have never been more proud of you than I was for all the years you never asked what was behind that door. The confusion on his face was beginning to be replaced by a dawning, painful understanding. But then you brought Madison home, I continued softly, and I saw the look in her eyes that your mother had always warned me about. It was the look of a person who doesn't see a home but an inventory, who doesn't see a family but a financial opportunity. I knew in that first meeting that she would be the one. She would be the one to test the foundations of this house and of our family. And I knew that her greed would eventually place you in an impossible position, forcing you to choose between your promise to me and your loyalty to her. You should have told me, he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. You should have just told me what you thought of her. And what would you have done, son? I asked gently. You were in love. If I had told you my suspicions, if I had told you I thought your new wife was a gold digger, what would have happened? You would have defended her. You would have resented me for it. It would have driven a wedge between us, and she would have won. She would have isolated you from me completely. Some truths, David, cannot be told. They are too painful. They have to be discovered. You had to see her true character for yourself in the most undeniable, irrefutable way possible. It was a terrible, painful solution, son. But it was the only one I had. It was the only way to get you out of her web. The only way to save you. I let the words settle in the quiet room. He finally understood. The entire elaborate and cruel-seeming deception wasn't a trap for him. It was a lifeboat, a brutal, complicated, and desperate lifeboat I had built to pull him from a shipwreck I knew was coming. He looked down at his hands, and a single tear dropped onto the floor, then another. He didn't make a sound. He just sat there, the full weight of the truth finally crashing down upon him. The woman he loved was a predator. His father had known all along, and his own weakness had been the key she had used to try and unlock their future. After a long time, he finally looked up at me. The anger was gone. The confusion was gone. All that was left was a deep, profound, and heartbreaking shame. I'm so sorry, Dad, he whispered, for breaking my promise. I reached out and placed my hand on his shoulder. I know, son, I said, my own voice thick with emotion. I know. The conversation wasn't over. The healing had barely begun. But in that moment, in the quiet, shared sorrow of our ruined family, the first tentative brick of a new foundation had just been laid. The days that followed the raid were quiet, heavy, and strange. The house was no longer a crime scene, but it felt haunted by the ghosts of what had happened. The basement door was closed, the sleek black lock now a silent testament to the drama that had unfolded. David and I moved through the quiet rooms like two strangers, the vast, empty space between us filled with unspoken grief and shame. He spent most of his time in his old bedroom, the door closed. I spent my time in the kitchen making meals he barely touched, or just sitting in my armchair, the silence a heavy blanket. We needed to talk. I knew it, but the wound was too fresh, too raw. I didn't know where to begin. The breakthrough came on the third night. I couldn't sleep. I came downstairs to find David sitting in the dark living room, a single dim lamp casting a long shadow across the floor. He was staring at the mantelpiece at the photograph of his mother, my Ruby, her smile so full of life and light. I don't understand, he said, his voice a low, rough whisper in the dark. He didn't look at me. He just kept staring at the picture. How did you know? How did you see what she was when I was so blind? It was the question I had been waiting for, the question that needed to be answered before we could take a single step forward. I sat down in the armchair across from him. It wasn't just me, son, I said softly. In fact, it wasn't me at all in the beginning. It was your mother. He finally turned to look at me, his face a mask of confusion. Mom, this whole plan, I said, gesturing to the silent house around us, the basement, the test. It was her design. She was the architect. I was just the builder carrying out her final blueprint. I told him about his mother, not the mother he knew, the one who baked cookies and helped him with his homework. I told him about the other Ruby, the sharp, clear-eyed woman who had a profound and deeply cynical understanding of human nature. I told him about my life in Hollywood and how she had been my partner not just in marriage but in observation. We would go to these lavish studio parties surrounded by the most beautiful and charismatic people in the world, people who were masters of performance. And Ruby, my quiet, unassuming Ruby, saw through all of it. I told him about one party years ago at a famous director's mansion in Bel Air. We were standing by the pool, and she directed my attention to a young, beautiful actress who was hanging on the arm of a powerful, much older studio head. Watch her, Elias, she had whispered to me. She's not listening to his stories. She's looking at the other producers in the room. She's not in love with him. She's in love with what he can do for her. She's not looking at a man. She's looking at a career move. She called it the hunger, I explained to David. She said some people have a hole inside of them, an emptiness that they think money and status can fill. She said you can see it in their eyes if you know what to look for. A constant, restless, appraising gaze. The look of a person who is always calculating, always measuring. A person who doesn't see other people. They see resources to be used. I told him about the time our old friends the Hendersons had their family torn apart by their son's new wife, a woman who had manipulated him into suing his own siblings over their inheritance. Ruby had met the woman once for less than an hour and had come home and told me that family is about to be destroyed. That woman is a hunter, and she just found a very weak herd. I had told her she was being too harsh. A year later, the family was in ruins just as she had predicted. My voice was a low murmur in the quiet, dark room. I was giving my son the gift his mother had given me, the gift of seeing the world as it is, not just as we wish it to be. When you brought Madison home that first day, I said, my voice softening, I saw that same look in her eyes, the same hunger your mother had warned me about for years. As she walked through this house, she wasn't seeing a home. She was seeing an inventory, and when you told her the basement was off limits, I saw her eyes light up. And in that moment, it was like hearing your mother's voice, a whisper from the past, saying, be careful, Elias. This is one of them. David just stared at me, his face pale. He was finally understanding. The basement plan was her idea, I confessed. We came up with it years ago after what happened to the Hendersons. It was her final gift of protection for you, David. She knew you had a good, kind, and trusting heart, and she knew that a heart like that was a magnet for a certain kind of person. She said, if a good woman ever comes into our son's life, a woman who truly loves him, she will never care what's behind that door. The mystery will be a quirk, a funny family story. But if a hungry one comes along, a hungry one like the Henderson girl, it will become the only thing she can see. It will be an obsession. The basement was her final test, David, a test of character. I leaned forward, my heart aching for the pain I was causing him, but knowing he had to hear it. I couldn't just warn you. You were in love. You would have defended her, and it would have pushed you away from me and closer to her. The only way for you to see the truth was for her to show you herself. I had to let her fail the test as publicly and as undeniably as possible. It was a terrible, painful solution, son, but it was the only one I had. He was silent for a long, long time. He looked from my face to the picture of his mother on the mantelpiece, her beautiful, smiling, all-knowing face. The anger he had felt toward me, the sense of betrayal was gone, replaced by a deep, painful, and profound understanding. He hadn't been the target of the test. He had been the one the test was designed to protect. He finally looked at me, his eyes swimming with a fresh wave of tears, but these were not tears of shame. They were tears of understanding, of a deep and painful love for the mother who had seen his weakness and had loved him enough to build a fortress around it. She always saw everything, didn't she? He whispered. Yes, son, I said, my own voice thick with emotion. She always did. The house was quiet now, the chaotic energy of the raid having been replaced by a deep, hollow silence. We sat in the living room, my son David and I, the untouched mugs of coffee I had made hours ago now cold on the table between us. He had stopped crying, but his face was a pale, drawn mask of shame and exhaustion. He had been staring at the floor for a long time, lost in the wreckage of his own life. Finally, he looked up, his eyes meeting mine. The anger and confusion were gone, replaced by a quiet, searching curiosity. But the stuff in the basement, Dad, he said, his voice a low, hesitant whisper. Even if it was fake, it was based on something, right? You were always so successful. Your work in the movies, I just assumed that you were. He couldn't bring himself to say the word. Rich. I understood. His entire life he had lived with the mystery of the basement, and his imagination, fueled by Madison's greed, had filled that void with fantastic stories of a hidden, massive fortune. Now that the illusion was shattered, he needed to understand the truth. It was time to finally open the last locked door between us. I was good at my job, son, I said softly. Very good. For 40 years I worked on some of the biggest films in the world. The studios paid me well. But I wasn't a movie star. I wasn't a director or a producer. I was a craftsman, a man who worked with his hands. I built things that were designed to fool a camera for a few seconds to create a fleeting moment of magic on a screen. I leaned forward, my voice taking on a new seriousness. And your mother was brilliant with money. While other people in Hollywood were buying fancy cars and beach houses in Malibu, we were investing. She didn't trust the fleeting nature of movie money. She trusted the slow, steady power of time and good sense. We didn't go to fancy parties, we bought stocks. We invested in real estate, small properties, and up-and-coming neighborhoods back when they were cheap. We built a comfortable life, David, a secure life. I am a modestly wealthy man, but the fortune Madison imagined, the kind of fortune that fills a secret vault with gold bars and priceless diamonds, that was always an illusion, a prop, just like in the movies. I stood up and went to my desk. I took out a thin, simple folder. It wasn't a leather-bound ledger filled with offshore accounts. It was a simple quarterly statement from my financial advisor. I handed it to him. "This is it," I said. "This is the real treasure. No gold bars, no diamonds, just a sensible, well-managed portfolio of stocks and mutual funds. The fruit of 40 years of hard work and your mother's brilliant, careful planning." He took the statement, his hands trembling slightly. He looked at the numbers. It was a comfortable sum, more than enough for a secure retirement, but it was a world away from the tens of millions Madison had conjured in her greedy fantasies. It was the wealth of a successful craftsman, not a king. He looked up at me, a new understanding dawning in his eyes. The mistake Madison made. David. I continued, sitting back down in my chair. And the mistake I was so terrified you would learn from her is thinking that these numbers, the figures on this page, are the real treasure. They're not. They're just a tool, a means to an end. It's just paper. I leaned forward, my voice filled with a passion and an urgency I hadn't felt in years. The real treasure, David, the real legacy, it's in your hands. It's in my hands. It's the skill to look at a raw, unformed piece of wood and see the beautiful, useful thing it can become. It's the integrity to do a job well, to be a man of your word, to create something of value with your own effort and your own mind. That is a wealth no one can ever take from you. It's a treasure that cannot be faked, and it cannot be stolen. It is the only treasure I have ever wanted to pass on to you. And the other part of the treasure, I said, my voice softening as I glanced at the photo of Ruby on the mantel, was your mother. Our life together. The memories we built in this house. The love. That is a pricelessness that can't be appraised. It can't be liquidated. It can't be sold to the highest bidder in a secret late-night deal. I was redefining the very meaning of the words we had all been fighting over. Wealth, treasure, legacy. I was taking them back from the world of greed and falsehood that Madison had created, and I was grounding them in the simple, honest truth of our family. David was silent for a long time, the financial statement resting forgotten in his lap. He was looking at his own hands, the hands of an architect, a builder. He was finally, truly understanding. I stood up. "The basement you saw tonight was a stage," I said, "an illusion. But I have another basement, my real vault, and I think it's time you finally saw it." I led him not down the dark, mysterious hallway, but out the back door to the small, detached building I had always used as my personal workshop. It was a simple, cluttered, beautiful space filled with the tools of my trade and the rich, comforting smell of sawdust. I flicked on the lights. "This, son," I said, spreading my arms. "This is the real treasure." I stood there in the doorway of my workshop, the rich, familiar scent of sawdust and oil filling the air. "This, son," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "This is the real treasure." David just stared. He didn't step inside. He just stood on the threshold, his eyes scanning the cluttered, beautiful chaos of my life's work. He saw the old, heavy workbench, its surface scarred with 1,000 cuts and nicks, each one a memory. He saw the walls lined not with gold bars, but with tools, hundreds of them hanging in their designated places, their wooden handles worn smooth from a lifetime of use. He saw the stacks of lumber, the half-finished projects, the blueprints pinned to a corkboard. He saw a room that was the absolute antithesis of the cold, sterile, glittering vault he had just left. That room had been about the illusion of wealth. This room was about the reality of work. He looked at the space, and then he looked back at me, and his face, which had been a mask of confusion, finally completely crumpled. It was a slow, agonizing collapse. The dam of his denial, which had held back a tidal wave of painful truth, finally broke. She didn't love me? He whispered the words, a raw, hollow sound, a statement of a truth so profound and so devastating it seemed to suck all the air out of the night. It wasn't a question. It was a verdict. No son. I said softly, my heart breaking for him. She didn't. He staggered back a step as if my words were a physical blow. He leaned against the doorframe, his legs suddenly unable to support him. He wasn't just realizing that his wife was a criminal, he was facing a much deeper, more personal horror. He was facing the fact that his entire marriage, the central pillar of his adult life, had been a lie, a performance, a long con. I watched as his mind began to replay the movie of his life, but this time with the director's commentary turned on. I could see it in his eyes, the way they flickered, unfocused, as he sifted through the memories, re-examining them in the harsh, unflattering light of the truth. He thought of their first meeting, which he had always seen as a fairy tale, a moment of pure serendipity. He now saw it for what it was, a calculated interception. He had been a mark, a man with a wealthy father and a kind, trusting heart, and she had spotted him from across the room. He thought of all the times she had praised his work, his ambition. He had seen it as loving support. He now saw it as a farmer tending to her prized livestock, fattening it up for the eventual slaughter. Her encouragement wasn't for him, it was an investment in her own future. He thought of the fights they'd had, about money fights he had always seen as the normal stresses of a modern marriage. He now saw them for what they were, carefully orchestrated. Pressure campaigns designed to make him feel inadequate, to make him more desperate for the kind of success she demanded. And he thought with a fresh, sickening wave of shame of the final brilliant manipulation. The fake financial crisis, the tears, the pleading, the way she had turned his love for her and his desire to be a good provider into a weapon against his own father. He saw now that he had never been her partner. He had been her tool, the easiest, most effective tool she had for breaking into the vault. The letter he choked out, his hand going to his head. The letter from the bank. It was all fake. She made it all up. Yes, I said. But it looked so real, he whispered, his architect's mind still struggling with the perfection of the forgery. That was her gift, son, I said, a bitter sadness in my voice. She was a brilliant marketer. She knew how to create a desire, how to package a lie, how to sell an illusion. In another life, she could have been one of the greatest creative directors in this city. She chose to use her gifts for destruction instead of creation. He slid down the door frame and sat on the cold concrete of the back patio, his head in his hands. A long, ragged sob tore through him, then another and another. It was the sound of a man's heart breaking, not with a clean snap, but with a slow grinding, tearing of every fiber. He was mourning a woman who had never really existed. He was grieving the loss of a life he had never really had. I walked over and sat on the steps beside him. I didn't touch him. I didn't offer any empty words of comfort. There are some sorrows so profound that they must be borne alone. All a father can do is sit nearby, a silent, steady presence in the dark, a quiet promise that when the storm is over, you will not be alone. We sat there for a long time in the quiet of the California night, the only sounds the chirping of crickets and the ragged, painful sobs of my son. He was facing the full, terrible weight of his own blindness, the shame of his own gullibility. He was confronting the fact that the woman he had shared his bed with, the woman he had promised his life to, had seen him as nothing more than a key to a locked door. It was a truth so devastating it could destroy a man. And as I sat beside him, my heart aching with his pain, I prayed to a God I wasn't sure I still believed in. I prayed that my son, my good, kind, and broken son, would be strong enough to survive it. The police were gone. The flashing red and blue lights that had painted my walls with a chaotic, strobing rhythm were replaced by a profound and heavy silence. The house, which had been a stage for a high-stakes drama just an hour before, was now just a quiet, empty crime scene. Madison and her crew had been taken downtown for booking. The circus was over. All that was left was the emotional wreckage. My son David was still sitting on the floor in the living room, his back against the sofa, his head in his hands. He hadn't moved. He hadn't said a word. He was a statue of shame and disbelief. Maya had quietly let herself out, leaving the two of us alone in the aftermath of the explosion I had so carefully engineered. I walked to the kitchen, my movements feeling slow and heavy, and made 2 cups of coffee, the familiar, simple ritual, a small anchor in the storm. I brought a mug to my son and placed it on the floor beside him. He didn't seem to notice. I sat down in my old armchair, the one piece of furniture that had been a silent witness to all of this, and I waited. The silence stretched thick and uncomfortable, punctuated only by the quiet, ragged sound of David's breathing. Finally, he lifted his head. His face was a wreck, his eyes red-rimmed and hollow with a pain so deep it was hard to look at. Why, he whispered, his voice a broken, ravaged sound. Why would you do all of this, Dad? The cameras, the fake gold. All of it. Why not just tell me you didn't like her? Why didn't you trust me? The question was a raw cry of pain, the accusation of a son who felt he had been betrayed, not just by his wife, but by his father as well. I took a slow sip of my coffee, gathering my thoughts. This was the most important conversation of our lives, and I knew that every word mattered. David. I began, my voice soft but clear. This was never about not trusting you. I have always trusted your heart. You are a good and loyal man. That is your greatest strength, but sometimes a person's greatest strength can also be their greatest weakness. I wasn't worried about your heart, son. I was worried about your kindness. I was worried that your goodness could be used as a weapon against you. He just stared at me, not understanding. Your mother, Ruby, I said, and the sound of her name filled the room with a gentle warmth. She saw the world with clear eyes. She was a romantic, but she was not a fool. She knew that people could be wonderful, but she also knew that greed was a sickness, a poison that could turn good people into monsters. Years ago, we watched it happen to our friends, the Hendersons. We watched their children tear each other apart over their father's inheritance, a beautiful family destroyed by a fight over money. We promised each other on that day that we would do everything in our power to protect our family from that same sickness. I leaned forward, my eyes locked on his. So we built a test, a character test. The basement son. It was never a vault to keep people out. It was a stage designed to see who would try to break in. The rule, the one I made you promise to keep all those years ago, it wasn't a punishment. It was a question. A quiet, lifelong question about your character. And for 35 years, David, you answered that question perfectly. You never wavered. You kept your promise. You passed the test with flying colors. I have never been more proud of you than I was for all the years you never asked what was behind that door. The confusion on his face was beginning to be replaced by a dawning, painful understanding. But then you brought Madison home, I continued softly, and I saw the look in her eyes that your mother had always warned me about. It was the look of a person who doesn't see a home, but an inventory, who doesn't see a family, but a financial opportunity. I knew in that first meeting that she would be the one. She would be the one to test the foundations of this house and of our family, and I knew that her greed would eventually place you in an impossible position, forcing you to choose between your promise to me and your loyalty to her. You should have told me, he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. You should have just told me what you thought of her. And what would you have done, son? I asked gently. You were in love. If I had told you my suspicions, if I had told you I thought your new wife was a gold digger, what would have happened? You would have defended her. You would have resented me for it. It would have driven a wedge between us, and she would have won. She would have isolated you from me completely. Some truths, David, cannot be told. They are too painful. They have to be discovered. You had to see her true character for yourself in the most undeniable, irrefutable way possible. It was a terrible, painful solution, son. But it was the only one I had, the only way to get you out of her web, the only way to save you. I let the words settle in the quiet room. He finally understood. The entire elaborate and cruel-seeming deception wasn't a trap for him. It was a lifeboat. A brutal, complicated, and desperate lifeboat I had built to pull him from a shipwreck I knew was coming. He looked down at his hands, and a single tear dropped onto the floor. Then another. He didn't make a sound. He just sat there, the full weight of the truth finally crashing down upon him. The woman he loved was a predator. His father had known all along, and his own weakness had been the key she had used to try and unlock their future. After a long time, he finally looked up at me. The anger was gone. The confusion was gone. All that was left was a deep, profound, and heartbreaking shame. I'm so sorry, Dad, he whispered, for breaking my promise. I reached out and placed my hand on his shoulder. "I know, son," I said, my own voice thick with emotion. "I know." The conversation wasn't over. The healing had barely begun. But in that moment, in the quiet, shared sorrow of our ruined family, the first tentative brick of a new foundation had just been laid. We sat there in the quiet of the California night, the only sounds the chirping of crickets and the ragged, painful sobs of my son. He was mourning a woman who had never really existed, a life he had never really had. I gave him the time and the space to let the storm of his grief pass. I didn't offer any empty words of comfort. There are some sorrows so profound that they must be borne alone. All a father can do is sit nearby, a silent, steady presence in the dark, a quiet promise that when the storm is over, you will not be alone. After a long time, the sobs subsided, replaced by a deep, shuddering exhaustion. He finally lifted his head, his face a wreck, his eyes hollow and empty. I stood up, my old knees protesting. "Come with me, son," I said softly. "There's one more thing you need to see." He looked up at me, his expression a mixture of weariness and confusion. "Dad, I don't think I can take any more secrets." "This isn't a secret," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "This is the truth. It's time you saw it." I helped him to his feet, and I led him not back into the house, but out across the cool, damp grass of the backyard. The moon was high and bright, casting long, silvery shadows. We walked past the rose bushes my wife Ruby had so lovingly tended, their blooms now closed for the night. We walked to the back of the property, to a small, simple, detached building that had always just been there. A simple, unassuming structure that looked like a large garden shed. For his entire life, this building had been a quiet, unremarkable part of the background. The real mystery, the real forbidden zone, had always been the basement. This workshop, this was a place he had never been forbidden from entering but had never once shown any interest in. It was my dusty, noisy world of work, a world far removed from his own clean architectural designs. I stopped in front of the simple wooden door. Unlike the high-tech, impenetrable vault door of the basement, this door had a simple, old-fashioned lock, the kind that opened with a brass key. I pulled the key from my pocket and slid it into the lock. It turned with a familiar, satisfying click. "The basement you saw tonight was a stage," I said, my hand on the doorknob. "An illusion designed to catch a liar. But this is my real vault. This is where I keep the things that are truly priceless." I opened the door. I flicked on the lights and the room was flooded with a warm yellow glow. The first thing that hit him was the smell. The rich, clean, honest smell of a lifetime of work. The sharp, fragrant scent of cedar and pine, the deep, earthy smell of oak and walnut, the faint metallic tang of machine oil, all mingling into a perfume that was the very essence of my soul. David stepped hesitantly across the threshold, his eyes wide. This was not a vault. This was not a museum. This was a place of creation. It was cluttered, chaotic, and beautiful. Tools, hundreds of them, hung in their designated places on the walls, their wooden handles worn smooth and dark from a lifetime of use. A massive old workbench, its surface a geography of scars and nicks, each one a memory, dominated the center of the room. Half-finished projects sat on sawhorses, the curved frame of a rocking chair, the intricate pieces of a puzzle box. Blueprints and sketches were pinned to a large corkboard on the wall. A fine golden layer of sawdust covered everything, glittering in the warm light like a magical dust. He walked slowly into the room, his movements filled with a reverence that had been completely absent when he was surrounded by the fake gold and diamonds. He ran his hand over the rough, unfinished surface of a plank of walnut, his architect's fingers instinctively reading the grain, the texture. "This," he whispered, his voice filled with a quiet awe. "This is what was really in the basement all along." "No," I said. "The basement was always empty, just a concrete room for storage. This has always been right here out in the open. You just never thought to look." I walked over to the old workbench, the one my own father had built for me when I was just a boy. I ran my hand over its scarred surface. "This is the real legacy, David," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite name. "Not the numbers in a bank account, not the appraised value of a house. It's this. It's the knowledge. The skill to take something raw and unformed, a simple piece of wood, and turn it into something beautiful, something useful, something that will last." I picked up a hand plane from the bench, its steel blade gleaming, its wooden body dark and smooth from the touch of my hands. "Your mother understood this. She knew that the wealth Madison was chasing was an illusion. It's fleeting, it can be stolen, it can be lost. But this, I held up the plane. The skill in your hands, the integrity in your heart, the pride you feel when you create something honest and true. That is a wealth no one can ever take from you. That is a treasure that cannot be faked and it cannot be stolen. It is the only treasure I have ever wanted to pass on to you. I walked over to a small locked cabinet in the corner, a cabinet he had never seen me open. I unlocked it. Inside there were no jewels. There were a dozen or so small, exquisitely crafted wooden objects, a music box with an intricate inlay, a set of hand-carved chess pieces, a small, perfect model of a sailboat. These were the projects I had made not for a movie, but for myself, for my soul. I took out a small, simple, beautiful box made of polished cedar. I brought it over to him. "Your mother always wanted me to teach you." I said, my voice a low murmur. "I was always too busy with work. And then, I thought you were on a different path, a path of designs and computers. I was wrong. It's never too late to learn." I placed the cedar box in his hands. He held it, turning it over and over, his fingers tracing the perfect seamless joints. He looked from the box to the workshop around him and then finally to me. His eyes were filled with a new, profound, and deeply humbling understanding. He wasn't just seeing a workshop. He was seeing his father, his real father, for the very first time. The final, most important door between us had just been opened, and the first real lesson in rebuilding was about to begin. He held the small cedar box in his hands as if it were a sacred object, his fingers tracing the perfect seamless joints, the smooth, hand-sanded finish. He was an architect. He understood design balance and the elegance of a well-executed plan. But this was different. This wasn't a drawing on a screen. It was real. It was solid. It had a weight and a warmth that his own glass and steel creations did not. I let him hold it for a long time, letting the quiet honesty of the object speak for itself. He was seeing for the first time the difference between a high-concept design and a piece of heartfelt craftsmanship. "It's just a box, son," I said softly. "But it's an honest box. The wood is what it is. The joints are what they are. There are no illusions." He looked up from the box, his eyes filled with a deep, profound shame. "I don't know how to do this, Dad," he whispered, his voice the rough, broken sound of a man who has lost his own blueprint. "I design things on a computer. I don't know how to build anything real." "Good," I said, my voice gentle but firm. "Then you have a place to start." Every great builder, David, starts with the honest admission that he doesn't know. The ones who get into trouble are the ones who think they already have all the answers. I took the box from him and placed it on the workbench. Then I walked over to the stack of lumber and selected a piece of rough-cut pine. It was not a beautiful piece of wood. It was knotted, warped slightly, and had a long, dark imperfection running through its center. It was flawed. It was real. I placed it on the workbench between us. "This is where we begin," I said. "Before you build, you must learn to see. Look at this piece of wood. What do you see?" He looked at it with the eyes of an architect, an eye for perfection. "I see flaws," he said. "It's warped. The grain is uneven. That knot in the middle is a weak point. I'd reject this piece from a job site." "You see flaws," I said, nodding slowly. "I see character. The warp can be straightened. The uneven grain tells a story of how the tree grew, how it fought for the light. And the knot is not a weakness, son. It is a challenge. It is the heart of the wood. You don't discard it, you work with it. You incorporate it. You make it a part of the design. You turn what looks like a flaw into the most interesting part of the piece." I picked up an old, heavy hand plane from the bench, its wooden body dark and smooth from a lifetime of contact with my hands. I ran my thumb over the perfectly sharpened steel blade. "Your mother taught me that," I said softly. "She used to say the same thing about people. Never trust a person with no visible scars. The flaws are where the real story is." I showed him how to hold the plane, how to set the blade to the perfect shallow depth, just enough to shave off a paper-thin curl of wood. "The secret isn't in pushing," I explained. "It's in guiding. You don't fight the wood. You listen to it. You feel the way the grain wants to move, and you follow it. It's a conversation, not an argument." I took the first pass. The plane glided over the rough surface of the pine, a whisper of steel on wood, leaving behind a perfectly smooth, almost shimmering surface. A long, fragrant curl of wood peeled away, delicate as a ribbon. I handed the plane to him. "Your turn." His hands, the hands of an architect, were soft, uncalloused. He took the tool awkwardly. It was a foreign object to him. His first few attempts were clumsy. He pushed too hard, the plane chattering and digging into the wood, leaving ugly gouges. He held it at the wrong angle, the blade skipping over the surface. Frustration began to cloud his face. "I can't do it," he said, his voice tight with the old familiar fear of failure. "I'm messing it up." "Of course you are," I said, my voice calm, patient. "Your hands are speaking a language they haven't learned yet. You're shouting at the wood. You need to learn to whisper." I stood behind him, my hands gently guiding his. "Feel that," I said as we moved the plane together. "Feel the way the blade just wants to skim the surface. Don't force it down. Let its own weight do the work. It's a dance, a partnership." We worked like that for what felt like hours. The only sounds, the rhythmic whispering shh of the plane and the soft thud of the wood shavings hitting the floor. We didn't talk about Madison. We didn't talk about the raid, the lies, the broken promises. We just focused on the wood, on the simple, honest, and deeply satisfying task of taking something rough and making it smooth. Slowly, I could feel the tension begin to leave his shoulders. The frantic, desperate energy that had been consuming him for weeks began to quiet. His breathing became deeper, more regular. His movements became less clumsy, more fluid. He was starting to listen, not just to me, but to the wood. After a while, he planned a long, perfect curl of his own, the wood peeling away in a single, unbroken ribbon. A small, involuntary smile touched his lips. It was the first real smile I had seen on his face in over a year. It was the smile of a man who had not just completed a task, but had created something, however small. He had taken a flawed, rough thing and had found the beauty hidden within it. We worked until the early hours of the morning. When we finally stopped, the piece of pine was no longer warped or rough. It was perfectly flat, its surface as smooth as silk, its grain glowing in the warm light of the workshop. David ran his hand over the surface, a look of quiet wonder on his face. "It's beautiful," he whispered. "Yes," I said. "It is." I looked at my son, his face smudged with sawdust, his eyes clear and focused. He looked exhausted, but it was a good kind of tired. It was the honest exhaustion of a man who has done a day's work, not the soul-crushing weariness of a man living a lie. "This is the first lesson, son," I said, my voice a low murmur in the quiet workshop. "Before you can build anything that will last, whether it's a house or a relationship or a life, you have to learn to see the truth of the materials you're working with. You have to see the flaws not as a reason to discard something, but as a challenge to be met with skill, with patience, and with respect. You don't run from the difficult parts. You don't hide them. You work with them. You make them a part of the story." He looked from the smooth, honest piece of wood on the bench to me, and I saw a new, profound, and deeply humbling understanding in his eyes. He wasn't just learning about woodworking. He was learning about himself. "Thank you, Dad," he said, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't quite name. "You're welcome, son," I replied. "Now let's clean up this mess. Tomorrow we learn how to make a proper cut." The foundation of his new life, a life of honesty, of integrity, of quiet, creative work, had just been laid. And it was strong. The years that followed were quiet ones. The storm had passed, leaving behind a landscape that was forever changed, but also strangely peaceful. The legal battles, the media frenzy, the raw, open wounds of betrayal. All of it slowly faded like a photograph left out in the sun. Madison took a plea deal, her army of expensive lawyers likely seeing the mountain of irrefutable video evidence and advising her to cut her losses. She was sentenced to 7 years in a federal facility for conspiracy and attempted grand larceny. Her accomplices received lesser sentences. The chapter was in a legal sense closed. But for David and me, the real work, the quiet, difficult work of rebuilding, had only just begun. He moved in with me for the first few months, a ghost in his own childhood home. We existed in a state of profound and awkward silence, two men orbiting the same black hole of pain and shame. The divorce from Madison was quick and quiet. She didn't contest it. There was nothing left to fight for. The illusion of wealth was gone, and with it any pretense of love she might have had. After the divorce was finalized, David moved into a small, modest apartment downtown. He sold his flashy car. He quit his job at the high-end architectural firm, unable to face the whispers, the pitying looks from his old colleagues. For a while I was worried. I saw him drifting, a man untethered from the life he had known. But then slowly a change began. He started taking small jobs, not as a high-concept architect, but as a draftsman, a project manager for small independent construction crews. He was working with his hands again in a way. He was on job sites talking to plumbers and electricians, dealing with the real tangible problems of building, not just the abstract beauty of design. And every Saturday, without fail, he would drive to my house. He wouldn't come to the main house. He would come straight to the workshop. For the past 4 years, that workshop has been our sanctuary. It is the place where we have slowly, painstakingly rebuilt our relationship from the foundation up. In the beginning, we barely spoke. We would just work. I would be at my lathe, and he would be at the workbench, sanding a piece of wood. His movements hesitant and unsure at first, then growing more confident over time. The only sounds were the hum of the machines and the rhythmic rasp of sandpaper on wood. The work was our language. The shared, simple, honest task of creation was the only way we could communicate across the vast, silent chasm of what had happened. We built things. We started with simple projects, birdhouses, small boxes. Then we moved on to more complex pieces, a set of bookshelves for his new apartment, a beautiful, sturdy dining table made from a single, magnificent slab of oak. Each completed project was a small, quiet victory, a testament to our shared patience and a fragile, returning trust. I remember one afternoon, about a year into this new routine, we were working on a grandfather clock, an intricate, challenging project that required immense precision. He was struggling with a complex dovetail joint, his frustration growing with each failed attempt. "I can't get it," he said, his voice tight with an old familiar frustration. "It's not perfect." I came over and looked at his work. The joint was off by less than a millimeter. The old David the architect would have seen it as a failure. "Nothing is perfect, son," I said softly, picking up a hand plane. "The wood is not perfect. The tools are not perfect. We are not perfect. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is to make it true, to take the flaws and the imperfections and make them fit together so well that they become a new kind of strength." I showed him how to shave off a paper-thin sliver from one side, how to test the fit, how to have a conversation with the wood instead of just forcing it into submission. He watched, his attention absolute. And when he finally fitted the two pieces together and they slid into place with a soft, satisfying click, a look of profound, quiet pride spread across his face. It was a look I hadn't seen since he was a little boy who had just learned to ride his bike. In these quiet moments, surrounded by the scent of sawdust, I have watched my son transform. The arrogant, insecure man who was so desperate for the approval of a woman like Madison has slowly disappeared. In his place is a quieter, more thoughtful man, a man who finds more satisfaction in a perfectly cut joint than he ever did in a lucrative contract, a man who is learning to value the work of his own two hands over the opinions of others. The wounds are still there, of course. We still have days when the silence is heavy, when the ghosts of the past feel a little too close. But the silences are shorter now. And the work, the shared, honest work, always brings us back. Last week we finished the clock. It stands in the corner of my living room now, its polished cherry wood glowing in the afternoon light. Its pendulum swings in a slow, steady, reassuring rhythm. Its chimes, when they ring out on the hour, are a beautiful, clear, and honest sound. It is more than just a clock. It is a monument to a father and a son who, in the wreckage of a great and terrible lie, found a way to build something true. We stood there for a long time, father and son, two survivors of a long and terrible war, looking at the house that was no longer our home. It was something more now. It was a symbol of our family's painful, brutal, and ultimately hopeful journey from a legacy of lies to a legacy of truth. The healing is not complete, but it is real, and it is built on a foundation that is at last solid and true. So that's where our story ends and where it begins again. My son and I standing on the foundation of a new beginning, a foundation built from the ashes of a terrible fire. And as I stand here, my story complete, I've had a lot of time to think about the lessons learned about the true meaning of loss and about the difference between justice and revenge. When this whole nightmare began, I thought I was mourning one single catastrophic loss, the death of my only son. I thought the pain of it was the worst thing a man could ever feel. But I was wrong. What followed was a series of losses, each one more profound and more painful than the last. I lost the man I thought my son was discovering, a stranger corrupted by weakness and greed. I lost the daughter-in-law I had welcomed into my family, discovering a predator hiding behind a beautiful smile. I lost my sense of safety, my belief in the simple goodness of the world. And in a way, I lost myself, becoming a hunter, a schemer, a man who had to walk through the dark and dirty alleys of the world to find his way. In the beginning, what drove me was rage, a simple, clean, and righteous anger. I wanted revenge. I wanted to see Chloe punished. I wanted to see her suffer as I had suffered. And a part of me, a part I am not proud of, took a grim satisfaction in setting the forces in motion that would lead to her downfall. I unleashed the tigers, and I watched as they closed in on her. But as the plan unfolded, I began to realize that what I was seeking was not revenge. Revenge is a fire that consumes everything, including the person who lights it. It's a hot, chaotic, and ultimately empty emotion. What Lena had wanted and what I came to understand was something colder, cleaner, and far more difficult. It was justice. Justice isn't about causing pain, it's about restoring balance. It's about forcing a person to stand in the wreckage of their own choices and take account of the damage they have caused. Revenge is an act of passion. Justice is an act of engineering. It's about understanding a flawed system and applying pressure to the weak points until it collapses, revealing the truth that was buried underneath. The greatest lesson, however, was the one I learned about being a father. For years, I thought my job was to provide, to protect, to build a safe and comfortable world for my son. I thought that was what love was. But in doing so, I had shielded him from consequences. I had made his life too easy. I had, with the best of intentions, helped to build the crooked house of his character. Lena knew that the greatest act of love she could offer him in the end was to tear that house down, to let him feel the cold, hard ground of rock bottom. Her justice was a form of terrible love, a love so fierce it was willing to break her own son's heart, in the desperate hope that it would give him a chance to grow a new, stronger one in its place. If there's one single truth that has come out of this whole fire, one thing I would pass on from my 75 years, it is this: I thought my greatest loss was my son's death. But I was wrong. The true loss was the man he had become long before the fake funeral. His mother and I gave him every advantage, but we failed to teach him the one thing that matters: character. I learned that a father's love isn't always about protection. Sometimes it's about letting your child face the consequences you tried so hard to shield them from. Justice isn't about revenge. It's about clearing the rubble so something true has a chance to be rebuilt from the foundation up. The road ahead for Andre will be long. The road ahead for our relationship will be long. But for the first time, it is an honest road. We are no longer living in a world of comfortable lies. We are living in a world of difficult, painful, but beautiful truth. And that, I have come to believe, is the only legacy that truly matters. What about you? Have you ever had to choose between a simple revenge and a more complicated justice? I'd be honored to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my family's story. It has been a difficult one to tell, but a necessary one. If my story has resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about the hard lessons and the quiet victories of life. Be well and be kind to one another.